The glass elevator ascended silently through the Reuters Tower as Sofia Reeves watched the Seattle skyline emerge through the morning fog. At 36, she was about to execute the most crucial phase of a plan 3 years in the making. Her reflection in the polished doors showed a woman dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit, her dark hair swept into a sleek chignon, betraying nothing of the anticipation coursing through her veins. "Good morning, Ms. Reeves." Thomas Ward, her attorney, greeted her as she stepped onto the 47th floor. "The papers are ready." Sofia nodded, her heels clicking against the marble floor as they walked toward the conference room. "Any last-minute surprises from the Whitman camp?" "None. Margaret Whitman still believes she's acquiring your tech startup. She has no idea she's walking into her own resignation." The thought brought a slight smile to Sofia's face. Margaret Whitman, CEO of Whitman Technologies and Sofia's former mentor, had spent the last 3 years systematically trying to destroy everything Sofia had built. Today, she would learn the true cost of underestimating the woman she'd once called her protagonist. The conference room was already filling with board members when Sofia arrived. She took her seat quietly, watching as Margaret swept in moments later, her signature red blazer a splash of color against the room's muted tones. At 58, Margaret still commanded attention, her silver hair and patrician features lending her an air of authority that had intimidated Sofia when they first met a decade ago. "Shall we begin?" Margaret's voice carried its usual note of carefully cultivated warmth. "I believe we're here to finalize the acquisition of Reeves Digital Solutions." Her eyes met Sofia's with what appeared to be sympathy. "I'm sure this is a difficult day for you, Sofia, but sometimes knowing when to let go is the mark of true wisdom." Sofia thought about the day, 3 years ago, when everything had changed. She'd been celebrating the successful launch of her company's revolutionary AI security platform when Margaret had called, requesting a private meeting. They'd met in Margaret's penthouse office, where the older woman had made what she called a generous offer to buy Sofia's company. "Your technology has potential," Margaret had said, "but you need Whitman's resources to truly succeed. Let us acquire you now, before you face the challenges of scaling up." Sofia had declined politely but firmly. She'd built her company from the ground up, mortgaging her house and pouring every penny of her savings into development. The technology was revolutionary, and she knew its true value. That's when the sabotage began. First came the whispers in the tech community about security flaws in Sofia's platform. Then key employees were poached with offers too generous to refuse. Potential clients began canceling meetings, citing mysterious concerns about reliability. Each setback seemed random, but Sofia recognized the pattern. Margaret was using the same tactics she'd often bragged about employing against her competitors. What Margaret didn't know was that Sofia had learned more than just business strategies during their mentorship. She'd learned how Margaret thought, how she operated, and most importantly, how she failed to notice threats that didn't fit her preconceptions. Before we proceed with the acquisition documents, Thomas interrupted Sofia's thoughts. "There are some preliminary matters to address." He began distributing folders to the board members. Margaret frowned slightly. "I wasn't aware of any preliminary matters. Just some standard corporate governance issues," Thomas replied smoothly. "You'll notice on page 3 the voting record from last night's emergency shareholder meeting." The room fell silent as the board members began reading. Sofia watched Margaret's face carefully, noting the exact moment realization dawned. "This is impossible," Margaret whispered, her composure cracking for the first time. "These voting shares, these investment groups, are all controlled by me," Sofia finished quietly, "through a series of holding companies I've established over the past 2 years. As of last night's vote, I control 51% of Whitman Technologies' voting shares." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. "How?" "You taught me well," Sofia replied. "About patience, about misdirection, about letting your opponent think they're winning while you position your pieces. While you were focused on destroying my company, I was using its remaining assets and my personal fortune to gradually acquire control of yours." The board members were now watching the exchange with rapt attention. Many of them had their own grievances with Margaret's leadership style, which was one reason Sofia had found it so easy to secure their support. "The vote has already been recorded," Thomas continued professionally. "Ms. Whitman is hereby removed as CEO of Whitman Technologies. Ms. Reeves will assume the position, effective immediately." Margaret's face had gone pale. The acquisition was never real, Sofia confirmed. It was simply a way to get you into this room, to help you understand exactly how it feels to have everything you've built taken away by someone you underestimated. The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and legal formalities. Margaret sat silent throughout, her earlier confidence shattered. As the board members filed out, she remained seated, staring at the documents in front of her. "Why?" she finally asked. "I was your mentor." Sofia stood, smoothing her suit. "You were supposed to be. Instead, you taught me that no success would be tolerated unless it came under your control. So I built something stronger, something you couldn't see coming because you were too busy trying to destroy what was right in front of you." She picked up her briefcase, pausing at the door. "You can keep your board seat, Margaret. I'm not like you. I don't need to destroy people to prove my worth. But remember this moment the next time you think about undermining someone you consider beneath you." As Sofia walked through the halls of what was now her company, she thought about the long road that had led here. The nights spent rebuilding after each of Margaret's attacks, the careful accumulation of evidence, the strategic placement of allies throughout Whitman Technologies. It had required patience, precision, and an absolute conviction that justice would eventually prevail. Her phone buzzed. A message from her husband, Michael. "Is it done?" "Yes," she typed back. "Meeting you for lunch to celebrate." Michael had been her rock throughout this ordeal, believing in her even when Margaret's attacks had seemed overwhelming. He'd never doubted her ability to turn the tables, even when she doubted herself. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of transition. Sofia moved quickly to stabilize both companies, announcing a merger that would preserve jobs while streamlining operations. She reached out personally to clients who'd been scared away by Margaret's whisper campaign, presenting evidence of the sabotage and her plans for the future. 3 months later, Sofia sat in what had been Margaret's office, reviewing quarterly reports. The merger was proceeding smoothly, employee morale was up, and the stock price had risen 15% since the takeover. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, looking up to see Margaret standing in the doorway. It was their first meeting since the takeover. "The board meeting is about to start," Margaret said stiffly. "I thought we might walk down together." Sofia studied her former mentor. Margaret looked older somehow, the past months having taken their toll. But there was something different in her bearing, a hint of humility that hadn't been there before. "Of course," Sofia replied, gathering her papers. They walked in silence for a moment before Margaret spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not needing to destroy people to prove your worth." She paused. "I spent so many years believing that was the only way to succeed in this industry. Watching you these past months, you've proven there's another way." Sofia stopped walking, turning to face her. "There's always another way, Margaret. Success doesn't have to be a zero-sum game." "I'm beginning to understand that," Margaret admitted. "I've been working with a leadership coach, trying to be better." Sofia nodded, recognizing the effort it must have taken for Margaret to say these words. "That's a good start." As they entered the boardroom, Sofia reflected on how different this scene was from her early days in the industry. She'd been so eager to prove herself, so desperate for Margaret's approval. Now she understood that true success wasn't about winning anyone's approval. It was about staying true to your principles while building something meaningful. The next year brought changes no one could have predicted. Under Sofia's leadership, the merged company pioneered new technologies in AI security, creating tools that protected privacy while advancing innovation. Margaret, true to her word, worked to transform her leadership style, eventually becoming a valuable ally in the company's expansion. One evening, as Sofia was preparing to leave the office, she found a small package on her desk. Inside was a framed photo from 15 years ago, her first day as Margaret's intern. A note was attached. "You've built something remarkable, not just in business, but in showing there's a better way to lead. I'm sorry I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. Thank you for teaching me again, Margaret." Sofia placed the photo on her desk, next to a more recent one of her executive team. The contrast between the eager intern she'd been and the leader she'd become was striking. She'd learned that true power wasn't about domination or control. It was about creating opportunities for others to succeed while staying true to your own values. Her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "Don't forget we're meeting the realtor about the new house tomorrow." Sofia smiled, thinking about the future they were building. The house wasn't just a symbol of their success. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of taking the higher road even when others chose a darker path. As she gathered her things to leave, Sofia caught her reflection in the window. The woman who looked back at her wasn't just a successful CEO or a strategic victor. She was someone who had faced betrayal and chosen to rise above it, who had found a way to win without losing her humanity. The Seattle skyline glittered in the evening light as she rode the elevator down. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose between expedience and ethics, between revenge and redemption. But Sofia knew now that the greatest victory wasn't in destroying your opponents, but in transforming them into allies. Her car was waiting in the underground garage, the driver holding the door as she approached. "Home, Ms. Reeves?" "Yes," she replied, settling into the back seat. "Home." As the car merged into traffic, Sofia thought about the legacy she was building. It wasn't just about corporate success or strategic brilliance, it was about showing that there was strength in compassion, power in forgiveness, and victory in staying true to your principles even when others abandoned theirs. The city lights blurred past her window, each one a reminder of the countless decisions that had led her here. She had chosen the harder path, refusing to let Margaret's betrayal turn her into someone she didn't want to be. In doing so, she had not only won the battle but had changed the rules of engagement for those who would follow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Sofia was ready. She had learned that true success wasn't measured in acquisitions or stock prices, but in the lives you touch and the changes you inspired. She had become not just the architect of her own fortune, but a blueprint for a different kind of leadership, one built on integrity, resilience, and the courage to remain true to your principles, even in the face of adversity. The car turned onto her street, and Sofia smiled, thinking of the journey ahead. She had transformed not just a company, but an entire culture, and in doing so, she had proven that the greatest revenge wasn't in destroying your enemies, but in showing them a better way forward. That was a legacy worth building.
Tim used to adore summer, and now this season seemed to return the affection, blessing him with warmth and other joys, such as the ability to find food and shelter without much effort. The beginning of Tim's homeless life coincided with the warm season, but he was horrified at the thought that, with the onset of cold weather, his life would change for the worse. However, he tried to push away the gloomy thoughts, focusing instead on daily minor problems, such as where to find work, spend the night, wash and eat without getting beaten up. Rapidly, Tim figured out where he would be safe and where the likelihood of encountering hooligans, crazed by summer freedom and hormonal surges, or law enforcement officers, who were sometimes even meaner than the thugs, was high. Of course, he hadn't always lived like this. More precisely, not so long ago, because of his own trustlessness, someone else's dishonesty and unfortunate circumstances, he had slid down the social ladder to the unenviable status of a person of no fixed abode, or simply a homeless person. Being a child, Tim could not have imagined that in the future he himself would become a vagabond. His parents, learning about his future, would have been horrified. Shame and disgrace. Their youngest son, the favourite and darling, had turned into a vagabond, forced to fear the police and live on the street. The man refreshed himself by swimming for a while in the river, rubbing away the goosebumps with a towel forgotten by someone on the beach. Then he carefully placed it in his travel bag, which now held all his belongings, put on his clothes, shaved, looking at himself in a mirror shard, and then walked briskly along the embankment. Early in the morning, trucks with goods would arrive at the numerous cafes on the embankment, and sometimes he could earn a bit by carrying boxes. Even if they paid him with products instead of money, it was still something. Tim couldn't find a permanent job because he didn't have any documents. As the cherry on top, he also didn't have any acquaintances in this city that was foreign to him. Travelling by plane and train was impossible due to the lack of documents, and hitchhiking back home over 1,000 kilometres was scarier than staying put. It was one thing if he had cash, but travelling just for luck was too big a risk. Now, he needed to either earn money intensively or find at least some place to preserve the remnants of decency before returning home. Although Tim was engrossed in heavy thoughts about the future, he did not forget to keep a watchful eye on his surroundings. On one of the benches, he noticed a hot dog that someone had left untouched. Without much hesitation, the man sat down next to the food and began to eat, mentally telling himself not to rush. Suddenly, he felt someone's gaze on him. A small girl, whom he hadn't noticed right away, was staring intently at the food in Tim's hand. It didn't take any supernatural gift to understand that the child was hungry. The few passers-by at this early hour hurried about their business, paying no attention to the little girl and the man having his breakfast. Tim asked, "Whose girl are you?" There was no answer. The man asked the next question, "Are you hungry?" The girl remained silent, but the way she swallowed her saliva while looking at the hot dog made the answer obvious. Tim broke off the part he had bitten into and handed the untouched portion to the little stranger. "Here, have some." The little girl, who looked about 5 years old, did not refuse, and quickly devoured the not-so-tasty sausage inside the bun, smeared with ketchup and mustard. However, she did not rush to leave. Tim offered her water, and the girl, taking it, waved her hands as if in gratitude. The man wasn't an expert in child psychology, but he tried to ask questions as gently as possible. "Where did you come from? Did you come here to walk with your family and get lost? What's your name?" However, the girl remained silent and only shook her head in response to all the questions. Tim frantically tried to figure out what to do next. The easiest option was to get up and leave, far away from this little girl. This option would cause him no trouble except pangs of conscience. A more complex path would be to try and find people who could help the girl get home. But whom to turn to? He was afraid to even approach the police station. What if they would set him behind the bars? They could easily accuse him of committing a crime, especially since he couldn't explain who this girl was, and the girl was silent. If the police decided that he was involved in her condition, he would be in big trouble. Tim, watching the little girl, drank down his supply of clean water, reasoned aloud, "Properly, I should take you to the police or a hospital, so I won't have a problem. My conscience would be clear and you would be safe, and your family would find you there. Or even better, just get up and leave. There are plenty of people walking around here, and someone will surely notice you and help you." The man stood up from the bench and was already leaning down to pick up his bag when he felt a small, cool child's hand on his arm. The little girl shook her head desperately. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Tim hurried to reassure the stranger, albeit a bit clumsily and roughly. "All right, no need to make a fuss. If you don't want to go to the hospital, you don't have to. But keep in mind that I don't have a home, and you'll have to sleep wherever you can. I have a secret hideout for now, but it's only a matter of time before it's discovered, and I'm kicked out." Tim spoke to the stranger as if she were an adult, unwittingly sharing his accumulated pain with her. It had been a long time since he had the opportunity to express everything that tormented him, and it was hard to find a more suitable listener. "I don't even have enough drinking water. Well, I can drink from the taps in the restroom, but that might be dangerous for you. The issue of maintaining hygiene is also unclear. The water in the river is still cool for such a little one like you. In short, nothing but problems. The scariest thing is that when the cold comes, I don't even know where to go. You, one way or another, will have to end up in some institution." The girl clung tightly to his hand, and it took him a long time to calm her down. "Listen, while we're here, so to speak, talking, there's less and less chance of finding a job for me. This means that food will be scarce today, so whether you like it or not, I have to go. That's how it is, you understand?" Wiping away her tears with her free hand, The girl nodded seriously. Tim sighed softly. "Well then, let's go. Maybe we'll get lucky." There was no work in the nearby cafes, but towards the end of the embankment, a kind-hearted waitress seated the girl at a table under a tree, gave her a plate of mashed potatoes and a cutlet, and asked Tim to unload a car that had arrived and help rearrange the tables under the awnings. So the little girl stayed with Tim. Since she never spoke, the man called her Little One, and she responded to it. Caring for the child pushed him to be more active, and it turned out that the girl evoked pity. Together they were more often given work and paid more generously. The cellars, where he used to get his part-time job, often left desserts for the girl, and even brought a few items left over from their daughters or granddaughters. A week had passed since the morning the little one had joined Tim, and he had grown attached to her in his own way. One evening, as they walked through the back alleys of restaurants and cafes, hoping to find something eatable, Tim sighed. "Ah, if only we had some ham, dried sausage, or at least semi-smoked. You'd like it, little one. These are hearty foods, not like sausages that might not even be made of meat. You take a bite, savour it, and then you don't feel hungry for a long time." The mere thought of the taste of quality meat products made his appetite grow, and Tim wanted to treat the girl to something especially delicious, not just what was thrown in the trash. This gastronomic idea turned out to be a tantalising obsession that, passing by the back door of one of the many restaurants on the street, Tim couldn't help but steal the coveted product. Of course, this was a clear descent into the abyss of homeless life, but at this very moment the man decided to compromise his remaining principles. He asked his little companion to wait around the corner of the building and watch the bag with their things. He put on a hoodie, pulled the hood over his head in case the entrance was monitored by cameras, took a couple of boxes lying near the door, and, pretending to be a delivery man, slipped in through the back door of the restaurant. The plan, of course, was not great. In fact, he had no clear idea of what to do once inside. Tim had no idea how the establishment he intended to pilfer was set up, but he was lucky. First, he didn't run into anyone, and on a table probably meant to facilitate the receipt of goods, he saw a box containing various sausages. Mentally, asking for forgiveness for his action, Tim took a piece of dry cured delicacies and, anticipating a feast, was already heading for the exit when he heard a stern shout behind him. "Hey, stop!" Of course, Tim had no intention of stopping and continued towards the door. "Hey, I'm talking to you! Stop! Are you deaf or something?" Tim, realising he was in deep trouble, rushed to the door, but it was too late. Someone grabbed his shoulder. Tim tried to free himself from the grip, but to no avail. He braced himself for a beating, but instead suddenly heard, "Paul speak? Is that you? What brings you here? Why did you come in through the back door of my restaurant and try to steal?" Tim was just as surprised and replied to the vaguely familiar man, "Yes, my last name is Speak, but I'm not Paul, I'm Tim, his younger brother." The well-groomed man with a strong grip introduced himself, extending his hand. "I'm Robert McDonough. I served with Paul and visited your place a couple of times, remember?" Tim felt terribly ashamed, and he spoke hurriedly. "I remember. I'm overjoyed to see you, even under these circumstances. Please forgive me for coming in here. Here, take it." Tim handed over the sausage. The restaurant owner seemed to ignore the information about the failed theft and continued to ask questions. "How is Paul? Is he here too? And how are you? Are you visiting this city, or have you moved here?" Seeing Tim's face darken, the attentive Robert realised he had touched on sensitive subjects, and looking at his clearly expensive watch said, "Damn, Tim, I have an important meeting. Please wait for me in my office. I'll have some refreshments brought through. Relax and eat, and then we'll sit down and talk properly." Tim hesitated. "Robert, I'm sorry I have to go. Someone is waiting for me on the street and probably already worried about me. I understand that you don't want to sit here in the office while someone is waiting for you, but I also don't want to just part ways with you like this. I'll order food for you and your friend, and you can both sit at the table to the right of the back door. As soon as I'm free, I will come right away. Does this option work for you?" Tim nodded gratefully, accepted 2 large bags from the hands of a pretty waitress, and promised Robert, "Thank you so much. I'll wait for you." Seeing her adult friend appear at the door, the girl who had been watching the entrance ran up to Tim and tightly hugged him. "Everything is fine, little one. I met an old acquaintance. See, he gives us so many treats that we will have a real feast now. He allowed us to sit here." The girl let go of Tim's arm and trustingly walked beside the man to the table under a canopy, and then they began to enjoy the hearty and delicious food from the restaurant that he had tried to rob. The vagabond and his little companion managed to finish most of the dishes, and the girl even started on the dessert when Robert emerged from the back door. For him, it was a complete surprise that the person waiting for Tim turned out to be a little girl. Trying to maintain a calm expression so as not to frighten the child, the restaurateur sat down on a small stool and introduced himself. "Hi, my name is Robert. What's yours?" Tim answered for his ward. "You will find everything I say strange, but it is the pure truth. The girl is mute, but hears and understands everything. We have been walking the streets together for about a week now, but I haven't heard a single sound from her, and I don't even know what her name is." Robert whistled. "Wow! What have you gotten yourself into?" Tim spread his hands. "I don't know myself. It just happened that no one cared about the little one except me. So now we wander together. True, I don't know how long this can last. Surely someone is looking for her, but I'm afraid to go to the police." Robert, having come to terms with his surprise, offered, "Listen, Tim, I invite you to my place. There, in a calm atmosphere, we will talk, exchange news. You can even spend the night without any problems. There is enough room for everyone." Tim did not refuse. The opportunity to wash with hot water, maybe even take a shower, and send the little one to wash in normal conditions was more than pleasant. He put the uneaten food in a separate bag, and taking the girl by the hand, followed Robert to the parking lot. When Tim opened the door in front of the little one, she, realizing that they were about to ride in the car, started to resist. This was strange, but there was no time to ponder the reasons for such behaviour. "Robert invited us to his place. He is my old acquaintance, a friend of my brother, and you don't need to be afraid. You trust me, as I understand?" Tim waited for the girl's consent, expressed by a short nod, and only then continued. "Well, and Robert is trustworthy too. You can wash with warm water at his house, maybe even watch cartoons. You probably love them. I, by the way, adored them in childhood. I'll tell you a secret. I would watch something with pleasure even now." The girl, after thinking for a moment, sat in the car's cabin, and the men followed her. After the hearty meal and the rocking motion of the car, the little one dozed off. A half-hour later, Robert, having opened the automatic gates, parked near the 2-story house. A small hallway led to a living room with a sofa, where Robert suggested putting the girl, who was still asleep. "Let her sleep, she must be tired, and we will sit in the dining room. Let's go." Tim carefully covered the girl with a soft blanket and followed the host. Robert handed the guest a set of clothes, towels, hygiene products, and explained, pointing to 2 doors in turn. "Here is the bathroom, and straight down the hall is the dining room. I'll go there, set a small table in honour of the meeting, and wait for you. Don't rush, and don't worry about the girl. If she wakes up, I can calm her down." Tim enjoyed the hot water, scrubbing his skin with a washcloth lathered with fragrant gel. He cleaned his teeth, combed his overgrown hair during his wanderings with a comb, and went to the dining room to answer all of Robert's questions. The host tried his best, and on the table were meat and fish appetizers. Pouring a yellowish liquid into glasses, Robert proposed a toast to the meeting. Tim drank the drink, which immediately gave him a feeling of warmth and calm. The tension of the last months, when he was forced to wander, retreated, and the man relaxed. At this moment, he did not need to look around for food or for a timely escape from potential danger. There was no need to listen to what was happening around, and Tim prepared for a difficult story. Robert did not rush him, but still asked that which interested him the most. "How long has it been since we last saw each other? About 10 years, as far as I can see. How is Paul doing?" Tim became even gloomier and began to tell what had happened in his family's life since the last meeting with Robert. "Unfortunately, Paul died heroically. He couldn't live in a peaceful life after what he went through in the war. I don't need to tell you. You were there too, and know very well that the memories stay with you forever. When another campaign started, Paul volunteered to join the ranks, even though our mother, father and I, and his fiancée begged him to stay. He responded to all our pleas the same way. He said he had experience and that it could save the young recruits, like me, his brother. In short, we first received the sad news of Paul's death. At his funeral, everyone held themselves together, but after the burial, my parents' health began to deteriorate rapidly. Soon, I was left alone. I lived on autopilot. I got my degree, found a job. I even had some ambitions, willing to work overtime just to avoid returning to an empty apartment. It was a strange life, Robert, I tell you. My career was taking off, but there was no joy in it. I started seeking emotions online, on dating sites. It was fun, and it seemed to make me feel less lonely. In short, without going into too much detail, things got serious with one of the girls, Ellie. The fact that there were many kilometres between us didn't hinder our communication. We had a long correspondence. Then we could talk on the phone for hours, and then she came to visit me as a surprise. She called me from the train station on Valentine's Day and said she had taken an unplanned vacation just to spend this holiday with me. It was overwhelming. I showed her around my hometown, and for the first time since my family's passing, I didn't feel lonely. Ellie stayed for a week, and we spent most of our time in bed. It was fantastic. I was going crazy over this seemingly modest girl. When she was getting ready to leave, she invited me to visit her in return. Naturally, I didn't delay my visit to my beloved. We met a couple of months later on her turf, in one of the cities in that region. It was a fantastic week. With each passing day, I grew more attached to Ellie, and eventually I proposed to her. She didn't play coy and agreed right away, but she reminded me that she had no plans to move away from her hometown. Pressing herself against me, she straightforwardly said she would be happy if we lived together. I promised to think about it, though I already knew the decision I was going to make. The next morning, I told her that we would meet soon and wouldn't have to part again. I went back to sell my apartment and buy another one where Ellie and I could be happy together in her city. This took some time, and we were almost constantly in touch. We would always talk briefly in the morning and then chat almost until dawn in the evenings. I sold almost all my belongings, and with a minimal number of clothes and a few photo albums and a substantial sum on my bank card, I went to my beloved. She arranged an evening for me that was truly unforgettable. I was in the euphoria and somehow told her about my plans, mentioning the amount on the card and even sharing the PIN code as a sign of special trust and love. After that conversation, I felt an incredible fatigue. The last sweet memory is of me falling asleep, carefully led to the sofa, kissed on the cheek and covered with something warm. The awakening was far from as pleasant as I would have liked. Instead of a kiss, I felt a kick in the ribs. Instead of the soft sofa, I found myself on a hard bench. Instead of Ellie's sweet face, I saw the stern faces of 2 policemen. One of them had woken me up with a rough kick. When they demanded my documents, it turned out that they were missing from where they should have been. Anxious, I started looking for my passport in my bag, stammering out what had happened to me. The policemen just laughed. They didn't believe me at all. To be fair, it's not difficult to understand why. The story was too convoluted. After all, according to me, I had fallen asleep 1,000 kilometres away from the city where I woke up. I managed to persuade the younger policeman to go to Ellie's social media page, to call her on the number listed there, which I had been too lazy to memorise. I was worried that my beloved might also have fallen victim to some evil scheme and could be in a frightening situation. However, her voice, coming through the speakerphone, told the police that she didn't know any Tim Speak and had never been to the city where, according to me, we had met. After this information, my already confused and sluggish state became completely indifferent. I didn't even resist when one of the policemen, who had suggested that I was under the influence of banned substances, which had caused my strange fantasies about the girl and the missing documents, searched my bag. He took the bills from my wallet, leaving very little. My attempt to protest was met with another kick in the ribs. As they left, they informed me that they are currently having no claims against me, but it would be better for me to leave their territory as soon as possible, or next time they may not be so kind. Gradually, the full horror of the situation began to dawn on me. It seemed that the police were partly right. I must have been under the influence of some substance and had revealed all my secrets to Ellie. The fact that she had answered the call and calmly and brazenly denied knowing me indicated her confidence that I wouldn't find the truth. The girl knew from our conversations that I had no close relatives and had even lost touch with friends after the loss of my brothers and parents. In short, I was an easy target. I voluntarily sold my apartment and went to Ellie, who might not even be her real name. I started remembering oddities. For example, my beloved never introduced me to her friends or relatives. There were no typical feminine touches in her apartment. No flowers, photographs, or cute knickknacks. During the week when I stayed with Ellie, this didn't bother me. Who knows what style my beloved preferred? Honestly, I didn't pay attention to such minor inconsistencies when a charming beauty was by my side. After coming to my senses a bit, I still went to the police station, but it was unsuccessful. They refused to take my statement because I didn't have any documents. They literally asked me to leave and not bother them. So I've been wandering like a vagrant, and recently a mute girl joined me. And so we've been surviving, eating the food I get in exchange for small services. I can't imagine how I got the idea to sneak into the restaurant kitchen today. Robert, I ask for your forgiveness again. Robert listened to the brother of his war comrade without interrupting, and when Tim finished his story, he poured a little more cognac into the glasses and began suggesting measures to resolve the situation. Life has beaten you down, Tim, but I think restoring your documents won't be too much trouble. Not instantly, of course, but within a reasonable time, everything will work out. As for the money on the missing card, I'm afraid it will be more complicated, and I can't guarantee the result. In any case, don't be sad. It's great that you found me. It's time for me to return the favour. I owe Paul my life, so I'll do everything I can for you, his brother. It's my sacred duty. You can stay with me. Tim began to thank Robert warmly, and then he asked a question that had been bothering him even more than his own well-being. I understand that this is presumptuous of me, but I also need to figure out what to do with the girl. I was afraid to take her to the police so I wouldn't end up being blamed. Not only does she not speak, but I noticed that she feared the car. The man nodded. Yes, the situation with the girl is much more delicate. It's unclear why no one is looking for her and how she ended up on the street. This could take a terrible turn if a homeless person without documents goes to the police and says he found her by chance and doesn't know where she came from. You know what? My wife will return soon, and we will discuss all this with her. I'll call her now and ask her to buy some girlish things, and you make yourself at home here. Eat, drink, and feel comfortable. After the encouraging conversation, Tim, who was already relaxed from the shower and the treats, felt as if a weight had been lifted from his heart. Of course, he was ashamed that he had burdened a virtual stranger with his problems, but he was truly grateful to Robert for taking such an interest in his fate. Even a brief respite from wandering, spending the night in normal conditions, already improved his mood. Lost in thought, Tim peeked into the living room and saw that the girl was already awake. "Hey, are you awake?" he said gently. "Do you want to eat?" The girl nodded. Tim's little companion eagerly devoured everything the host offered, delighting him with her contented expression. Robert, who had already caught his wife, said quietly, "It's wonderful when children eat with appetite. They can be picky, saying they won't eat this or that, but she's not like that." After the meal, Robert suggested turning on cartoons for the girl, and she nodded joyfully, settling on the now familiar sofa in the living room. The men took the chair next to it and also enjoyed watching the funny chases of the mischievous cat after the clever mouse. The idyll was interrupted by the front door swinging open, and a charming woman entered, carrying 2 large bags. She gave a nod to the men and then sat down on the sofa next to the girl and handed her a doll she had taken from the bag. "Hello, my name is Jane, and this doll dreams of becoming friends with you and playing all sorts of interesting games. I also have bath toys, soap bubbles, and little ducks that float. Let's go have some fun with them, and then we'll finish watching the cartoons." The girl, as if asking for permission, looked at Tim, and hearing from him that she could trust Jane as well, reached out her little hand. The woman took one of the bags she had brought and went to bathe the little one. Tim grew anxious. "And your wife won't mind that you've brought a vagrant and a little girl with an unknown past into your home?" Robert reassured his guest. "We often have people staying with us, mostly friends, sometimes business partners, and a few times just acquaintances of acquaintances. Besides, she knows that if it weren't for your brother, I wouldn't be alive at all. So don't worry about it." About an hour and a half later, when the men had discussed many stories, mostly related to Peter, Jane entered the living room. She was without the girl, and seeing the surprise on Tim's face, explained, "I took the little one to the children's room, dried her hair, and she started to fall asleep, so I put her to bed. Besides, I took a picture of her. We should check if there are any missing children in the database who look like her, and now we all need to rest." Robert showed Tim the guest bedroom, and the poor man, who had regained hope for a return to normal life, fell asleep peacefully for the first time since his wanderings. The new day brought unexpected information. "Her name is Fiona Marshall, and she is considered to have run away from an orphanage," Jane said. "They were brought from the distant region on an excursion, and no one noticed at what point she either accidentally or intentionally fell behind from the group. They obviously don't want a scandal, so there's a chance to quietly go and return the little one. It's the weekend now, and the principal's stationary number isn't answering, so we just have to wait for Monday." The little girl played with her new doll, and she beamed with joy. Watching her, the adults felt both tenderness and concern. After all, Fiona would have to return to the orphanage, and although this is Of course, better than wandering the streets. Life in a state institution can hardly be called paradise. For Tim, this day in the family circle, where everyone treated each other with love and respect, reminded him of a happier past, and he almost cried from the surge of emotions. And he also felt sad, as he surprisingly realised about parting with his little companion. There was no denying that she complicated his life, as he had to take care of her, feed her, and worry about being questioned about their relationship. But at the same time, it gave his existence meaning, although, if he thought rationally, their separation was inevitable. Meanwhile, Robert also had news for Tim. On Monday, we'll go to the police station to see Detective Cicero. He is already aware of your misfortunes, and I was promised that he would approach the situation with the utmost consideration, so don't be sad. The next day Tim was very nervous, but the meeting with Detective Cicero went well. The policeman behaved correctly, didn't mock or sneer, and only grimaced painfully when, in his story, even softening the details, Tim told him about the arbitrariness of the law enforcement officers. Of course, I apologise deeply for this incident. I think you understand that personal purges are conducted regularly, but it is still impossible to completely get rid of the inappropriate people here. Regarding the scam you fell victim to, we will do whatever we can. When the men got into the car, Robert encouragingly patted his protégé on the shoulder. Well, consider the matter moving. Everything is in motion, and that means you'll have your documents soon. Meanwhile, so you don't get bored, if you like, you can work in my restaurant. We are always short on additional hands. Tim didn't know how to thank Robert. Words seemed pale, and he replied, I can even work as a simple cleaner, because I am very grateful for everything you are doing for me. Robert waved his hands dismissively. It's nothing. It's important to me that the brother of my saviour gets his life back on track. Robert and Tim spent the whole day busy with work, and in the evening Jane shared some news. Tomorrow they will be expecting Fiona at the orphanage. They have entrusted us to deliver her there ourselves, although I think they are just saving on gas. Anyway, that's the situation. Now, we just need to inform the girl, and for some reason I am sure she won't be thrilled with this news. Robert, I have a completely free day tomorrow, so I can take the girl without any problems. I'd also like to see what the conditions are like in that institution. Can I come too? Fiona seems to trust me, Tim asked. Robert, is it okay if I ask for a day off, right after starting work? Robert smiled. Consider it a work day on the road. Besides, we'll load the car with sweets for the orphanage kids early in the morning. It feels awkward to show up empty-handed. That's what they decided, and despite their efforts to put on a brave face, the adult's mood was far from cheerful. Fiona took the news that she had to return to the orphanage stoically. The girl didn't throw a tantrum or cry. She started unbuttoning her dress. Jane understood that the guest thought that they would take away her gift, and kneeling in front of her, quickly buttoned it back up, saying, "No, sweetheart, the dress is yours to keep. It's yours now. I promise we will visit you. Do you believe me?" The girl nodded seriously, like an adult. She went to Tim, shook his hand, either thanking him or saying goodbye in advance. The summer morning of their parting was cloudless. Although Jane tried to cheer up the passengers in her car, she wasn't in a cheerful mood herself. The woman drove the car slowly, following the navigator's instructions, but the destination inevitably approached. Jane parked the car by an unremarkable fence, behind which children about 10 years old were playing, and the passengers got out of the car. The playing children curiously examined the visitors standing at the gate and unsuccessfully pressing the button on the outdated intercom. No one answered. Jane was already starting to look through her phone for the principal's number, but a stout woman approached the gate, whose mere glance could freeze someone on the hottest day. "Hello, I'm Mrs. Perry, the principal of this institution," she addressed the visitors. "Please come in, and thank you for finding and helping Fiona." And, opening the gate, she invited Fiona and her attendants. The principal's office was quite modest. On the walls, in simple frames, hung certificates of honour, photographs of Mrs. Perry in the company of vaguely familiar people, and a portrait of the country's leader occupied a place of honour directly above the principal's chair. "So, I am listening. What did you want to talk about?" Jane, confident and even somewhat at ease, although she was on someone else's territory, shared her idea. "You see, I am a fashion designer. I create and sew clothes, adding hand embroidery. I create interesting toys, and would like to offer you a collaboration. For example, I could come, say, once a month to conduct a masterclass. I think the children would find it interesting. Plus, I could bring some treats at the same time." Mrs. Perry, interpreting this offer in her own way, clarified, "OK, I understand. What do you want in return? I warn you right away, our budget is tiny. I have no way to pay for all these masterclasses. What can I say? The button on the gate hasn't worked for a month. Some rooms don't have anyone to change the light bulbs in the fixtures. And instead of qualified educators, we have to hire graduates of our own orphanage, practically without special education. I'm not even afraid to say all this to outsiders because even if I get reprimanded for such frankness, they won't dismiss me. There's no one to replace me." Jane patiently explained, "I'm not asking for payment. All the training will be on a voluntary basis. All we need from you is a room and a group of willing participants." Mrs. Perry looked at the visitor and smiled sarcastically. "You make it sound so simple, although I am ready for a good idea. Just don't disappear, as they say here, because adults come and go, and the children wait, hope, and get disappointed." Jane promised. "No, I won't disappear. I'm genuinely interested in this." Tim suggested, "If you like, I can replace the light bulbs and try to fix the intercom." Mrs. Perry graciously agreed, and while the man was busy, Jane asked, "Please tell me Fiona's story. Maybe I could try to find a doctor who deals with muteness." The principal sighed, looking sad, which made her seem like an ordinary, tired woman rather than a snow queen, and she told the story. When Fiona's aunt brought her to us, the girl was already not speaking. As it turned out, the reason was the shock from the car accident she was in with her parents. The girl survived, but her mum and dad did not. Fiona had seen her aunt no more than 2 times before this tragedy. The woman confessed that she didn't know how to deal with children, and her lifestyle wasn't suitable for a little girl. But she only agreed to look after the apartment left by Fiona's parents and to pay the utility bills for it until Fiona became an adult. In general, I don't blame her. Everyone has their own destiny. Raising a child is not an easy task. Who would know this better than me? Jane and Mrs. Perry exchanged phone numbers, and the principal escorted the visitors to the car. Fiona was allowed to say goodbye to them, and the principal barely managed to persuade the girl to unclench her hands, which she had gripped around Tim and Jane's hands. The return journey passed in even more oppressive silence, and only at the end of the trip Jane said, "It's strange. I didn't do anything bad today, but I feel like a traitor. I feel so sorry for Fiona." Tim nodded. "Yes, I feel something similar. The little one trusted me, and although I couldn't give her anything, and I myself was thinking that we would have to part ways before the cold weather anyway. If you don't mind, I will accompany you on your trips to the orphanage to see Fiona." "Of course I don't mind." 2 weeks later, Tim received his documents, and although Detective Cicero could not report positive news about the search for the scammer, this was already a big victory. Jane and Tim were going to visit the orphanage, and since it was Robert's day off, he decided to join them. When Fiona entered the room where her adult friends were waiting for her, Jane even shivered from surprise. The girl looked incredibly sad, and, not having a robust build before, now looked even more emaciated. Taking control of her emotions, the woman handed her a beautiful blouse, a fabric bunny, and several drawings. "Fiona, hi! Look what I brought you!" The girl timidly approached, but reached not for the gifts, but hugged Jane around the neck. The woman tried not to cry so as not to upset Fiona, and Robert came to his wife's rescue, who was losing her composure. "We brought not only these gifts, we have another surprise for you, sweets, but as Mrs. Perry promised, they will be given out after lunch." Tim, sitting next to the embracing woman and girl, also contributed by saying, "Imagine, I'm no longer a vagrant. I got a new passport. There's such a funny photo in it. You want to see?" The little girl nodded, and the atmosphere in the room became a little less tense. Jane, as promised, conducted a masterclass, but the leaving was tearful for everyone. Later that evening, laying in her bed, it suddenly dawned on the woman. "Of course, we should think guardianship or adoption. Robert, what do you think about the idea of taking Fiona in?" Robert shrugged. "You know I don't mind children at all." The family began gathering documents and completing all the formalities. During another visit to the orphanage, the woman asked Fiona, "Do you agree to move in with me and Robert permanently?" The girl nodded so vigorously that there could be no ambiguity. Mrs. Perry, who was watching this scene, was genuinely happy for her ward. "Fiona has an apartment, and if you take on all the obligations about the girl, you will also have to take care of the apartment and fulfill all the necessary formalities. You need to meet with her aunt to resolve this important issue." The principal wrote the coordinates of Fiona's aunt on a piece of paper, and Robert arranged a meeting right away, choosing one of the nearest cafes. "I'll spend a little more time here with Fiona and join you at the cafe later. Anyway, you don't need me there." And an hour later, entering the cafe, Tim froze in surprise. Sitting on the sofa opposite Jane and Robert was Ellie. He could not be mistaken, for it was this very profile that he had first almost worshipped and then hated. In a few steps, he covered the distance that separated them and grabbed the woman firmly by the shoulder, causing genuine surprise to Jane and Robert. "Tim, are you okay?" asked Robert. "Meet Sasha Marshall, Fiona's aunt, and you should be more polite with her." "Robert, Jane, before you is the very Ellie who lured me out of my hometown like a gullible fool and robbed me, taking not only the money but also the photo albums that reminded me of my family. Robert, how quickly do you think Detective Cicero can get here?" Tim's voice trembled with nervous tension as he spoke. Meanwhile, Ellie, or Sasha, managed to regain her composure somewhat and tried to accuse Tim of being inadequate. "Jane, Robert, I am seeing this person for the first time. As far as I understand, he is acquainted with you, so only for your sake I will not make a scandal. Just tell him to let me go, and we will forget this incident. In the fall, people might have some mental issues." Tim was a little confused and then suggested, "Put your hand on the table." The woman reluctantly obeyed, and Tim asked Jane, "Roll up your sleeve to see the large birthmark in the shape of a small apple on the inside of your elbow." Jane did as he asked, and was almost not surprised to find that Tim was right. Fiona's cousin turned out to be the very woman who had caused Tim's vagrancy. Detective Cicero arrived and began investigating Ellie and her accomplices. In the end, she received a prison sentence, and Tim was refunded most of the money he had on his card on that unfortunate day. After all these events, Tim decided not to return to his hometown, but to settle near Robert's family. He rented a cosy apartment, from which he could even walk to their house. He often visited Jane, Robert and Fiona. The girl, thanks to her sessions with specialists, started to overcome her muteness, little by little. And soon there was another addition to the family. The birth of the long-awaited baby was the best reward for Robert and Jane's good deed. As the doctors had said, it was practically impossible. So, in the end, everything worked out for the best. Besides, Tim had started a romance with one of the waitresses at the restaurant, and he believed that this time it would be sincere. Lorena stepped out of the apartment building into the fresh May morning. The air was fragrant with blooming lilacs. The sky was clear and bright. Summer was just around the corner. Her 3-year-old son, Adam, was already at kindergarten, taken there by her husband, Tyler. Tyler worked as a programmer and often worked remotely from home. He was not just a wonderful husband, he was caring, kind, attentive, and, most importantly, understanding. When Lorena returned from work tired, he didn't need to be told. He would silently make tea, prepare a cosy nest on the sofa with a blanket and pillow, and take Adam to another room, so Lorena could have some quiet time. Lorena's job was stressful but rewarding. She worked as an endocrinologist in a private medical centre. The only downside was that she had to combine her medical duties with paperwork. Usually she could find time during the day to fill out the necessary documents, but not always. But yesterday patients kept coming in a steady stream, so Lorena had to take the report home. The next morning, Lorena had almost reached her car when she remembered that she had left the report at home. Thank goodness she remembered in time. Lorena turned around and hurried back to the apartment building. She bounded up the steps, her heart racing, quickly unlocked the door to her apartment and went into the kitchen. Suddenly, she heard a muffled conversation coming from their bathroom. Tyler was on the phone with someone, engrossed in the conversation. It must be about work, but his tone was strange, tender, almost cooing. Lorena picked up the report and tiptoed towards the bathroom. She froze outside the door and listened. "Gwen, dear, you know I have work to do, but I'll definitely come see you on the weekend. What do you want me to bring you?" Lorena couldn't believe her ears. Tyler, her caring and attentive husband, was talking to another woman with such tenderness and love. "Yes, darling, I miss you so much. I love you too." There was so much tenderness and love in Tyler's voice that Lorena's heart ached with longing and jealousy. She had always thought they had a perfect family, that their relationship was special, harmonious, reliable and sincere. She had even been surprised that such a thing was possible. And now it turned out it was all an illusion. Tyler was just pretending to be the perfect husband and father, using his flexible schedule as a cover for his affair. How else could she explain this strange phone conversation? Lorena turned around and walked towards the exit. She had heard enough. Her blood was pounding in her temples, her face was hot, but her hands were strangely cold. Somehow she managed to quietly slip out of the apartment. In the comfort of her beloved car, Lorena felt a little better. She turned on the music, started the engine and drove off. But all the way to the medical centre, she couldn't stop thinking about Tyler. Strangely, she wasn't thinking about what to do next. Those thoughts came later. Instead, she found herself remembering the beginning of their relationship. Lorena and Tyler first met at a mutual friend's party. Lorena was a senior medical student at the time, while Tyler had already graduated from university a couple of years earlier and was working as a programmer at a large firm. Lorena noticed him right away. He wasn't trying to be the centre of attention, but made witty remarks at just the right moments. Unlike the other guys, he barely drank and was quite handsome, tall, dark-haired and fit. "He's a hottie, isn't he?" The birthday girl nudged Lorena and winked conspiratorially. "Want me to introduce you?" Lorena panicked and protested. She wanted to get to know the handsome guy better, but not like this, not through a setup. That evening, Lorena was the centre of male attention. The striking figure, bright blue eyes, chestnut shiny hair, cascading in soft waves below the shoulders. Lorena herself knew she was beautiful. At first the compliments and admiring glances from the guys were pleasant, but then they began to be overwhelming and even frightening. One of the admirers was particularly zealous. He constantly hovered around, telling her something, even trying to hug her. The guy had had a lot to drink. Lorena already didn't know how to get rid of him. Salvation came from an unexpected side. Tyler approached Lorena and looked her in the eyes with a smile. He, as it were, asked, "Has he bothered you enough?" The girl silently nodded with a smile, and Tyler held out his hand to her. "I thought you might need help," he said quietly when they found themselves outdoors. The sky was studded with bright stars, and it was quiet and very peaceful around. The silence was almost deafening after the din of the party, and from this, or from Tyler's closeness, the girl felt slightly dizzy. "Thank you. I didn't really know how to get rid of him anymore. Anyway, I don't want to go back there," Lorena confessed. "Well, as for me, I ended up there by chance. I don't even know the birthday girl, but I'm overjoyed that I was here today and met such a wonderful girl. I've been watching you all evening." Lorena felt herself blushing. She had often been complimented, and it was always pleasant, but Tyler's words filled the girl with some special warmth. The young people walked around the city, talked and laughed. Lorena felt as if she had known Tyler for 100 years. Relationships developed rapidly. With Tyler, Lorena felt truly calm and happy. She had never met such a deep, sincere and reliable person before. Unlike many guys Lorena knew, Tyler was kind and not ashamed of it. He never tried to appear brutal, macho, or prove something to someone. The guy surprised Lorena with his domesticity from the very first days of their acquaintance. Unlike her, who had lived with her parents, he knew how to cook. In his 3-bedroom apartment, there was always order. While Lorena sometimes did not have time to clean up even in her own room. But the main thing was that Tyler understood Lorena. He subtly felt Lorena's mood, understood when she was tired or angry, and always knew how to cheer up the girl and lift her spirits. Lorena often noticed hidden sadness in the eyes of her beloved. Others did not see this. Tyler skillfully played the role of a carefree guy who had everything good in life, but Lorena knew what the matter was. Yes, Tyler's past turned out to be not easy. He was born to a mother who at that moment did not need a baby at all. Barbara, Tyler's mother, grew up in a well-to-do family. Her father was the top manager at the factory, and his mother was a primary school teacher, and they both were preparing a brilliant future for her. After school, she was supposed to enter a prestigious university, then go to work in the Ministry of Finance. His father had connections there, but Barbara, most of all, wanted to hang out with friends and have fun. She looked with envy at the companies of teenagers sitting at the entrances and singing songs to the guitar. She dreamed of being part of this fun crowd. But she couldn't rebel against her parents. If she could still somehow deal with her mother, her father, he kept his daughter in an iron grip. He was always afraid that she would follow in the footsteps of his eldest unsuccessful sister. Barbara didn't even know this aunt of hers, but they said she was a drinking woman who often changed lovers and didn't work anywhere. Barbara obeyed her parents, but secretly hated them. She waited for adulthood. Then she would finally gain her longed-for freedom, and no one would stop her any more. But Barbara gained her freedom earlier. When the girl was 13, her father had a heart attack right at work. The man could not be saved. Since then, the life of the family has changed a lot. There was no longer a strict father who could keep the freedom-loving Barbara at home with textbooks and a piano. There was no one to be afraid of. So it turned out that Barbara was left to her own devices. In the life of the teenage girl, there were now friends, alcohol, adventures, and romances. Everything she had long dreamed of. And after graduating, she declared to her mum, "I'll go to work. I'm sick of your studying." Barbara really got a job. At first, she tried her hand as a saleswoman, then worked as a baker's assistant. But it turned out that money is not so easy to come by. So the girl decided why to break her back. Mum feeds, gives clothes and roof, and there are always guys and men willing to pay her and entertain her for a small service. No matter how Barbara's mother tried to reason with her wayward daughter, nothing worked. Then one day, Barbara said to her mum, "I'm expecting a baby. The term, it turns out, is already decent. It cannot be interrupted. Do you have acquaintances who can help with this?" "What are you talking about?" her mother said, astonished. "This is a crime, and it's great harm to health. Now you have to give birth, since you have delayed so much." But Barbara did not want to give birth. She spent hours lying in a hot bath, trying to provoke a miscarriage, drinking herbal infusions, lifting weights, running up and down the stairs to exhaustion. Nothing helped. At term, despite Barbara's lifestyle and unwillingness to give birth, a healthy, strong boy was born in the maternity hospital. The new grandmother hoped that now her daughter would finally get her act together. And how else? But Barbara could no longer be corrected. Having got rid of the hated, heavy burden, the young woman immediately slipped away to friends and cavaliers. The baby, named Tyler, turned out to be unnecessary for her. He was raised by his grandmother. Since it didn't work out with her daughter, the woman took bringing her grandson up with redoubled energy. Tyler remembered that he lived peacefully and happily with his grandmother. He always studied well and behaved excellently at school. In high school, the guy became interested in programming. The grandmother took part of her savings and bought her grandson an expensive computer. After school, Tyler entered the Faculty of Information Technology. Studying was easy for him. He soon began to work part-time. But when the guy was in his 4th year, the closest and dearest person to him suddenly passed away. The heart of the not-yet-old woman did not bear it. Of course, worries about her daughter undermined her health. Tyler was in deep grief. He could not come to terms with the fact that there is not a single person on this earth who truly loves him. He secretly hoped that he would see his mother at the funeral, but Barbara never showed up. Gradually, life took its course. The guy graduated from the university, got a job, and new plans and desires, friends and entertainment appeared. Youth is youth. And then Tyler accidentally met Lorena and fell in love at first sight. That's the kind of story it was. And before this day, Lorena thought they had an ideal relationship. But now there was this Gwen. Lorena realized that she could not deal with the onslaught of emotions and feelings alone, and decided to call her best friend Sarah. If anyone could help her make sense of what had happened, it was her. Lorena could hardly wait until lunchtime. Work, of course, was a distraction, but anxious thoughts kept her from focusing on her patients' problems. She listened to them, made typical prescriptions, and recorded their complaints in their charts. But all she could hear was her husband's tender voice, cooing with some unknown Gwen. Finally, the lunch break arrived. Lorena immediately dialed her friend's number and poured out to Sarah everything she had overheard that morning. Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" Sarah's voice sounded bewildered. "This doesn't sound like Tyler at all. It's difficult to even imagine. Anyway, don't rush into anything. First you need to figure out what's going on. Why don't you just ask him directly?" "Directly? I don't know. He'll start making excuses, come up with something. I want to gather evidence first, so I can be sure myself, and so he can't deny it." After talking to her friend, Lorena felt a bit lighter, her thoughts clearer. She would be more attentive now. She would catch the hidden signs, delays at work, the scent of women's perfume, secret text messages. What else do lovers have? Yes, Lorena was not ready to make any decisions right away. She needed to think everything through, prepare for the separation, and meanwhile, she would have to pretend that nothing was happening. Would she be able to pull it off? She would have to summon all her acting skills. It had to work. That evening, everything was as usual. Tyler had prepared dinner. He had worked from home all day, but he found the time to roast a chicken with potatoes and make a salad. The apartment greeted Lorena with tantalizing aromas. Adam was already home. "And here comes our mum." Tyler smiled and hugged Lorena tightly. "Why such a face? You must be tired. Go take a bath, wash away the negativity, and I'll set the table in the meantime." Lorena forced a smile in response and went to the bathroom. She closed the door behind her and looked in the mirror. She wasn't much of an actress, that was clear. Her face bore an expression of universal grievance. Everything was obvious at once. But Tyler, on the other hand, was quite the actor. The picture of contentment. And those honest eyes. Everything as usual. Incredible. Maybe it really was all just a misunderstanding? She didn't want to believe that Tyler was a scoundrel and a traitor. Lorena took a shower, changed into a housecoat and went to the kitchen. What a delicious dinner! Lorena genuinely praised her husband. "I could never make it like this." "I love cooking for you." Tyler smiled broadly. "Why don't we go to the water park on Saturday?" Adam suddenly suggested. "We haven't been in so long." "We can't do it this weekend." Tyler shook his head, his eyes immediately filling with sadness. "Work, son. I need to work this weekend." "Figures." The boy pouted, looking sullen. Lorena remembered how her husband had promised the mysterious Gwen that he would visit her this weekend. If she hadn't overheard the conversation, she would have suspected nothing. Tyler had an irregular schedule. He was often called into the office on weekends, but now Lorena was sure. Her husband was planning to visit his mistress. That same evening, Lorena talked everything to Sarah. Follow him and see where he goes. I'll look after Adam, don't worry. I will wait near the entrance in the morning until he came out. Thank you. Great idea. I'll follow him and see everything with my own eyes. In the morning, Tyler pretended to be getting ready for work. He drank his coffee, packed his laptop in his backpack, and put on pants and a shirt. While he was busy, Lorena slipped out of bed and pulled on jeans, a t-shirt and a sweater. She needed to leave the apartment right after her husband to avoid losing his trail. Over all this, she threw on a long housecoat, a disguise. As usual, Tyler kissed his wife goodbye, hugged her tenderly, and said he would miss her. What hypocrisy! He's going to see his mistress and putting on such a farewell scene. Sarah was already near, and as soon as Tyler got in the car, she slipped into the entrance. As Lorena had expected, Tyler drove past his office. Too bad, but she was prepared for this. Tyler turned onto a country road. Lorena hurried after him. Strange, did his mistress live in some village? Fields and plantations flashed by on both sides of the road. Tyler's dark blue SUV moved in the distance, barely visible. There were few cars on the road, so Lorena kept her distance. Tyler turned right and disappeared behind an oak grove. When Lorena's car reached the turn, Tyler's SUV was already entering the open gates. Behind the grove, in the middle of a field, stood a tall, pale green fence. Behind the high fence, the outlines of a grey 3-storey building were visible. As the car entered the inner courtyard, the gates slowly closed. The structure looked like an impregnable fortress. This was not what Lorena had expected to see. She parked her car behind the bushes, not daring to approach any closer, and feeling frightened. What had he gotten himself into? Suddenly the mistress' story didn't seem so terrible. Something strange and incomprehensible was happening. Lorena finally made up her mind. She cautiously stepped out of the car and slowly approached the gate. There was a sign above the gates: Medical and Social Institution for Children with Special Needs. What did this mean? Lorena had even more questions now. Feeling confused, she returned to her car and decided to wait for Tyler and ask him directly. Lorena reclined in her seat and gazed up at the bright blue sky. Fluffy white clouds drifted across it. Some insects hummed in the air. It was beautiful here. Only the ugly building surrounded by a tall fence marred the view. 4 hours of waiting passed. Cars occasionally approached the building. Not many. Lorena counted about 5 or 6. They disappeared behind the gates, just like Tyler's SUV, but none of them re-emerged. The sun was already setting when the gates slowly opened again, and Tyler's SUV finally emerged. Of course, he noticed his wife parked behind the bushes, and pulling over to the side of the road, he stopped, got out, and walked slowly towards Lorena's vehicle, his eyes filled with sadness, his head bowed, and his shoulders slumped. It pained Lorena to see her usually cheerful husband in such a state. Although she had always noticed this sadness in his eyes, even in the happiest moments, but she had thought it was because of his difficult history with his mother. But apparently there was something more. "Hi," Tyler said, embarrassed, as he sat down in the passenger seat. "Honestly, I didn't expect to see you here." "Tyler, please, tell me everything. You don't have to hide anything from me. I want to know what's going on. What is this place? Why did you come here?" "It's a long and complicated story. I'm confused and don't know what to do. I didn't want to burden you with all this. I thought I would protect you from unnecessary worries and problems. I'm not at peace myself, and I didn't want to trouble you." "We are a family," Lorena reminded him, and placed her hand over her husband's. Tyler sighed, but his eyes were no longer so sad, and the burden weighing on him seemed to lift a little. His shoulders straightened, and his voice became more confident. "Well, okay, there's no way out now. You would have to find out anyway. Who could have guessed that you have the spirit of Miss Marple in you?" Talking about Tyler's mother was always painful for his grandmother. Her eyes would dim, and her shoulders would slump. In those moments, she looked so unhappy that Tyler quickly changed the subject. One day, when Tyler was already at a high school, she called him for a serious talk and told him everything about her only daughter, Barbara. "Grandma, and how is Mum now? Is she alive?" "She's alive," the woman quickly replied. "She's alive, don't worry. She's doing well by her standards, living the way she always wanted." Tyler felt relieved. He had never known his mother. He understood that she had left him, rejected him, but the thought that this woman might no longer be alive was somehow frightening. Tyler had never seen her in his conscious years. His grandmother showed him childhood and teenage photos of Barbara, so in Tyler's mind, his mother was a cheerful, pretty girl with unruly russet hair and laughing eyes. "Do you communicate with her?" Tyler asked another question that bothered him greatly. The boy understood that he needed to take everything from this candid conversation. There might not be another opportunity. It was clearly difficult for his grandmother to recall memories of her daughter. "It can't be called communication," the woman answered. "I know where she is. It's a small town where we used to live.
My old acquaintances sometimes tell me how Barbara is doing. Everything is relatively normal there. She drinks, of course, but other than that, she's fine."
Tears welled up in Tyler's eyes. He suddenly felt truly abandoned and unwanted.
"I can't upset Grandma. There's no need to be sentimental now. Think about something else," he thought, and with a tearful smile. "Enough about the sad things. I've found out everything I need to know. I have a mother, but she wanted to start a new life. That's all."
From that day forward, Tyler often thought about his mother. What does she look like now? What does she do? Who does she live with? And most importantly, does he have any brothers or sisters? Time flew by quickly. Before he knew it, Tyler enrolled in a university, studying information technology. But thoughts of his mother never left the young man. He firmly decided that sooner or later he would find her. And then, what he had feared, all his conscious childhood happened. His grandmother did not survive another heart attack. The young man took the loss very hard. He withdrew into himself, stopped communicating with friends. During this time, thoughts of his mother haunted him constantly. She was the only family he had left in the world. Tyler felt an overwhelming urge to find her. One day, he made up his mind. In the morning, Tyler went to the train station and bought a ticket to the town where he knew his mother lived. It was time to meet her and get answers to important questions. He couldn't stay in the dark any longer. Whatever happens, happens. The station was deserted. Here it was, the town where his mother lived. A small, sleepy place that looked more like a large village. Tyler knew his mother's address. He had found it in his grandmother's thick notebook. The woman meticulously wrote down important things: birthdays of friends and relatives, phone numbers, dates of doctor's visits. Tyler asked for directions to the station. It turned out to be not far. Great. He would take a walk, stretch his legs a bit and gather his thoughts. He desperately hoped that his mother would welcome him warmly. She would cry, apologize, explain why she hadn't shown up all these years. Maybe she had been ashamed. Tyler, of course, would forgive her. He held no grudge against the woman who had left him and run away. She had been very young and inexperienced. Perhaps she regretted her actions now. And there it was, the house he was looking for. A leaning fence, a cluttered garden overgrown with tall grass, peeling paint on the walls. And what was wrong with the roof? Had it leaked? How could anyone live like this? Tyler cautiously knocked on the gate. Somewhere deep in the garden, a dog barked lazily. And then silence. "Come on in, young man, don't be shy," an old woman from the neighbouring yard called out to him friendly. "Barbara never locks her gate. Are you from social services? Or maybe the press?" "From social services," Tyler replied, glad he didn't have to come up with an explanation himself. Tyler entered the yard of the house where his mother lived. His heart pounded dully in his chest, and his mouth felt dry. Everywhere he looked there were signs of neglect. In the corner, behind a blackened, leaning wooden outhouse, with a door that wouldn't close, there was a makeshift dump. Broken furniture, plastic and glass bottles, some shards, food packaging. Deep in the overgrown garden, he could see a small old house. The door was half open, either broken or the owner was expecting someone. Or maybe she just wasn't used to locking it. Tyler entered the dark room. It smelled of dust, dirt and mould, and there was a strong smell of stale alcohol in the air. It was an unpleasant place. The floor hadn't been cleaned in years, covered in a layer of sand and dust. Bottles were scattered everywhere. The old, dried-out furniture was covered with dirty rags. Tyler couldn't help but remember his grandmother's clean apartment. She cleaned it herself every day and had taught her grandson to do the same. Tyler thought about the conditions he would have grown up in if he had stayed with his mother.
And for the first time, a thought flashed through his mind. Maybe it was all for the best. Maybe it was good that the party-loving young woman had left her son with her mother and run away. Tyler walked into the large room that served as the living room. On the sofa, covered with a crumpled and clearly unwashed sheet, a woman was dozing. The young man recognized her immediately. It was Barbara from the photograph, only much older and with the signs of a dissolute life on her face. His mother opened her eyes, probably sensing that someone had come in. She looked at the stranger, but showed no fear. Barbara struggled to her feet and looked at the visitor questioningly, clearly expecting an answer. Tyler had imagined this first meeting many times, but now he just looked at the woman standing before him and couldn't find the words. The young man didn't know that in a brief moment one could experience such a storm of emotions. Pity, disgust, contempt, fear. The woman looked like the marginal types Tyler sometimes encountered on the streets of his city. Emaciated, with a puffy face of an earthy colour, small, watery, sunken eyes, dishevelled, thin hair, hastily tied in a stubby ponytail, broken, dirty, yellowish nails on calloused hands. "Who are you?" the homeowner finally asked. Her voice was hoarse and very much like a crow's cawing. Tyler was at a loss. "If you're from the guardianship, get out of here," Barbara declared resolutely. There was a threat in her eyes. "Everything is fine with us." "I'm Tyler," the young man finally managed to say. "Tyler, your son. Don't you recognize me?" "I see." The woman lowered her eyes as if pondering something. Tyler decided that she might be feeling ashamed and patiently waited for her to continue. "So, Tyler, that's what you look like. All grown up. An adult. You came because of the inheritance, right? We need to sign some papers. Part of my mother's apartment is mine, as you know. I was going to come to you myself. I need the money so badly, as you can see." Tyler looked at his mother in amazement. So she knew that her mother was dead, and she did not come to her funeral, did not want to see her son, who was all alone in the world. What kind of person is she? And she still hopes for some inheritance. But the granny had taken care of that in advance. "I'm not here about the inheritance," Tyler declared. "I just wanted to see you. We're not strangers, after all." "What about the inheritance?" Barbara asked eagerly. There was hope in her eyes. Tyler silently shook his head. "Grandma left the apartment to me." "I just knew it," Barbara said with annoyance. "The old witch never loved me. So why did you come here anyway?" "I have some questions for you." Tyler finally regained full control of himself, shedding his illusions. There would be no familial warmth, love, or remorse. His mother was a selfish person, focused only on her own pleasures. "Get out of here with your questions!" Barbara waved her hand dismissively. She was clearly upset by the news that she wouldn't get anything from her mother's inheritance. "I have the right to know," Tyler insisted. "Who is my father?" "I don't know myself," Barbara answered honestly. "I was popular with men back then. I had such admirers. Not like now. One of them must be your father, but I can't even remember his name now." "And why? Why did you abandon me?" "Can't you figure it out yourself?" Barbara snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "I wasn't even 20. I wanted to have fun, to live life to the fullest. And then pregnancy. I hated you from the moment I found out you existed inside me." Tyler found it difficult to listen to this confession. But I was quite satisfied when this old witch had taken all the care about you. I had money, plenty of admirers, and no one to nag or reproach me. Freedom! How happy I was to be free, without you, without a mother who always demanded something from me. It was such bliss." Tyler blinked in confusion. He already regretted coming here. And then something completely unexpected happened. There was a strange rustling behind the living room door, and a small, thin, dirty creature with tangled, matted hair appeared in the room. It was a little girl. She didn't walk into the living room, but literally crawled in. The child skillfully used her arms to move quickly, and her legs looked too weak and thin compared to the rest of her body. Tyler instantly forgot all the horrible things he had just heard from his mother. What kind of children could live in such filth and neglect? The little girl looked at the guests with curiosity and, it seemed, hope. Tyler rushed to her and lifted the girl from the cold, dirty floor. She trustingly wrapped her thin arms around his neck and suddenly smiled. The young man recognized that smile. It was his smile. "Who is this?" he asked Barbara, although he already knew the answer. "Your sister Gwen," Barbara muttered. "I had the operation after you, so I wouldn't have any more children, but she was born anyway." "What's wrong with her?" Tyler couldn't take his eyes off his little sister. A storm of emotions raged in his chest. His heart was filled with tenderness and pity for this skinny, grimy little girl. "She's disabled, has cerebral palsy, was born that way, and she's mentally challenged," Barbara said. Tyler felt a surge of anger. Poor sister. Not only had she lost her health due to her mother's lifestyle, but she also lived in such inhumane conditions. He had to save her. He couldn't leave his sister in this horrible place. "I'm taking her with me," Tyler declared, looking sternly at his mother. "That's none of your business. Give me the girl," Barbara demanded, approaching him. "Why? She needs care, treatment, activities, and you don't do any of that. She'll perish with you." "Get out of here," Barbara said. "Want to help her? Give me money. I'll buy her medicine, sweets, but she'll live with me." "Why?" Tyler repeated his question. "The benefits for her are good, as for a disabled child," a voice said from the doorway. Tyler turned and saw the neighbour who had advised him to enter the yard. "Get out of here!" Barbara was clearly losing her temper. "My name is Mrs. Scott, and I thought you were really from social services, or the guardianship authority," the woman said to Tyler. "I thought they had finally reacted to our report." "It's none of your business. Get out of here, all of you. I'll call Jack. You'll all be sorry," Barbara threatened. "Don't threaten us with your bully," the neighbour advised, and added, looking at Tyler, "Let's go." "But what about her? How can we leave her?" The young man looked helplessly at his little sister. "It's okay. She's lived here for 9 years. She can wait a little longer. I'll help you. We need to act differently here," the woman said. 9 years? Gwen looked much younger. Tyler sat her down in a chair and knelt in front of her so that their eyes were at the same level. Mrs. Scott and Barbara were arguing, but Tyler wasn't paying attention to their words. "Gwen, listen to me. I'm your big brother, and I'm going to take you away from here. Do you want to live somewhere else?" Tyler asked. "Yes," the little girl smiled and added, "It's bad here. I'm scared." "I'll take you away as soon as possible." Tyler stroked the little girl's tangled hair. His heart ached at the thought of having to leave her with her mother for even a little while longer, but there was no other way. Later, Tyler and the compassionate Mrs. Scott went straight to the city and managed to get a meeting with the head of the guardianship and trusteeship department. "If you don't act now, we'll go to the TV stations," Mrs. Scott threatened. "It's such a joy. The girl's brother has been found. Such a good, positive young man. He'll raise Gwen, and they'll ruin her there." "We'll look into it," promised the woman in stylish glasses, making notes in her thick planner. Mrs. Scott's calculation turned out to be only half correct. Gwen was, of course, taken away from her mother. Barbara was stripped of her parental rights. But Tyler could not obtain guardianship over his sister. He was too young, his official income was insufficient, and he was single and alone. The commission considered that the young man would not be able to cope with raising a child, especially a disabled one, who required intensive treatment and rehabilitation. Thus, Gwen ended up in a house for children with special care, though conditions there were excellent. The place had spacious bedrooms, playrooms, good food, mountains of toys and books, developmental activities, medical care, and a friendly staff. Gwen blossomed. She always greeted her brother with a joyful smile, hugged him tightly, and shared her news. But the man still felt guilty for not being able to keep his promise. He hadn't taken his sister home. He was doing everything he could to make that moment come sooner. He found official work, even though it was hard for a student. He set up a separate bedroom for Gwen in his apartment, but no one was rushing to give a disabled girl to a single young man. The diagnosis of mental retardation was not confirmed in the orphanage. It turned out that it was all due to educational neglect. Gwen, due to her illness, did not communicate with her peers. Her mother did not engage with her, did not take her daughter to kindergarten, let alone clubs. But in the orphanage, Gwen quickly caught up. However, her cerebral palsy, of course, did not go away. Rehabilitation specialists managed to improve the situation slightly, but there was no talk of removing the disability. Tyler searched for the best specialists for his sister, even bought an expensive exercise machine for the orphanage, which was necessary for his sister's exercises. He spent every weekend at the orphanage. The brother and sister got to know each other better and grew closer. Now Tyler was grateful to his mother for giving birth to Gwen. He had a wonderful little sister. The girl did not feel abandoned. Her brother was always by her side. She liked the orphanage, and yet Tyler still dreamed of taking Gwen out of the institution as soon as possible. But to achieve this, he needed to get married. The young man even considered a fake marriage. He looked for a suitable woman to formalize the relationship, take Gwen, and then get divorced. The wise Mrs. Scott dissuaded him from this risky step. "You are young and naive. They will wrap you around their finger and take your property when you divorce. People can be like that. Wait, don't rush. Gwen is doing well there. Doctors are taking care of her, and she's getting better. And you don't have the time or experience. You'll meet a good girl, fall in love, get married, and then take the girl." "And what if my wife doesn't like the fact that I have a sister who needs care? What then?" Tyler asked. "That will be a test of humanity." Then Tyler met Lorena and fell in love at first sight. He had never experienced anything like it before. When the young man found out that his feelings were mutual, he was overjoyed. Tyler cherished their budding relationship and was very tender with Lorena, so he did not dare to tell her about his sister. He was afraid that it would scare the girl away. Then there was the wedding, and Adam was born. Tyler felt joy and pride in having a family, but he had to lead a double life. He did not dare to tell Lorena about his sister. What if she feared the difficulties, and most importantly, Tyler wanted to protect Lorena from heavy thoughts and the need to burden her fragile shoulders with such responsibility. Tyler continued to visit Gwen every weekend. Of course, now he was a family man, and the meetings with his sister became less frequent and shorter, but Tyler tried not to miss these visits, as Gwen was waiting for him and was very upset if her brother could not come. She missed him. "I live between a rock and a hard place, and couldn't get the courage to tell you everything. And now you found out all this yourself," Tyler concluded, looking at his wife. "You are so kind. Good, but completely silly," Lorena sighed. She gently patted Tyler on the cheek. "I'm in shock from everything I've heard, but how could you think that I would be scared? I really want to meet your sister. Her place is in our family, and only there. She must be a wonderful child. She is sick, you understand? She is not just a child. Gwen is a disabled child. And I am a doctor, remember? I fully understand the difficulties and prospects. Let's meet her, right now. Lorena, I am so lucky with you." "I am the lucky one with you," Lorena smiled. She truly believed that. Tyler was smart, kind, gentle, and caring. The woman valued these qualities in her husband, and the story with his sister convinced Lorena once again that she had not made a mistake with her husband. "What is her size?" Lorena asked suddenly. "Clothing size. My dad's birthday is coming up soon. We will all go together, the four of us. Gwen should look like a real princess." Tyler smiled and hugged Lorena. His wife was right. He was indeed silly. How light and warm his heart felt now. And it could have been like this a long time ago. For 4 years, Karen had not believed in happiness. Once, she had everything a woman could wish for: a loving and beloved husband, 3 wonderful children, a beautiful apartment in the city centre, exotic annual family vacations, and an expensive car. But everything changed abruptly when Gary died. Gary was returning home late at night after a long meeting at work. He never spared himself, understanding that he needed to provide for his large family. On that fateful night, Gary got behind the wheel, extremely exhausted. Their company was preparing for an important project, so the man had barely slept in the past few days. The road was empty, so at some point Gary relaxed and apparently lost his vigilance. He simply did not notice the danger approaching. At the intersection, a truck crashed into him at full speed. There was no chance of survival. Watching the footage from the road cameras, Karen understood that if Gary had slowed down even a fraction of a second before the intersection, the tragedy could have been avoided. The cause was inattention and fatigue, and, of course, the truck driver who arrogantly hoped to speed through the empty intersection on a red light. But there was no point in blaming anyone now. Gary wouldn't come back anyway. Karen could not accept what had happened for a long time. When the police called her, she was convinced that she had fallen victim to a telephone prank or scammers who extort money from gullible relatives by telling them that a family member is in trouble. Karen got to the morgue in 10 minutes, almost getting into an accident herself. She entered the building on unsteady legs. "This is nonsense," she tried to convince herself. "This is some kind of mistake. Gary is at work. It's not the first time he's been delayed." "Mrs. McPhee?" A policeman called out to her. "Where is he?" she asked. "May I see him?" "Perhaps that's not the best idea," the man replied, somewhat embarrassed. "You see, it was a terrible accident. Almost nothing was left of the car. And your husband... I called you now more for the identification of personal belongings. I don't think it's reasonable to conduct a body identification in your state." Everything inside her went cold and tight. The policeman led the woman into a small room. Behind the desk sat another man. He lazily pulled out a drawer from the desk and took out a clear plastic bag containing items stained with red. "Here, take a look." The policeman began laying out the contents on the table. "Do you recognize any of these items?" Karen was about to say, without looking, that she was seeing all this for the first time, but then she noticed a golden pendant that she had given her husband for one of their wedding anniversaries. The woman reached out to the shiny rectangle, but her legs gave way. Everything in front of her eyes blurred. "Yes, these are my husband's things," the woman said in a trembling voice. "We need to go to the station now. Fill out the papers and watch the footage from the surveillance cameras," the officer told her. Karen no longer cared. Her whole world had suddenly collapsed. What did some papers matter now? After the funeral, Karen became completely indifferent to what was happening around her. The nanny took care of the children, and Karen began to drink secretly. She did not react to the critical remarks of the housekeeper, who constantly found bottles in the trash. She locked herself in her room and spent hours looking at photographs of their once happy family. This went on for several months. Then, one day, Karen woke up on a frosty winter morning with a severe headache. She looked around at the mess surrounding her and cried. Only now did she finally realize that Gary would never again come into their bedroom, hug her, or call her to eat the pancakes he always made on weekends for breakfast for the whole family. Leaving the room, the woman made her way to the kitchen first thing in the morning. Everyone in the house was still asleep. The clock showed it was just past 7. Karen was determined to cook her husband's favourite dish. When the last pancake had migrated from the pan to the plate, Chilton came into the kitchen. The eldest daughter was 8, but was quite developed for her age. "Mummy," the girl was surprised, "did you make Daddy's pancakes?" Of all the children, she was the only one who realised that her father was gone. Andrew, who was only 5, cried for a long time, but could not understand what was happening. And Leela was just a baby and unable to perceive such information. "Honey," Karen sighed heavily, "it won't be the same, but we're strong, aren't we? We'll try to cope somehow." Chilton sat with a confused look. Looking at her mother, the girl could hardly believe her words. Her mum had lost a lot of weight. Always neat, stylish hair had turned into some kind of crow's nest. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were trembling. "You know what?" Karen suddenly suggested. "Let's have a beauty day this morning, just the 2 of us." They used to organise this kind of entertainment regularly. Therefore, hearing her mother's proposal, the daughter agreed without hesitation. While they were talking, Andrew and Leela entered the kitchen, accompanied by Mrs. Musser, the nanny. The boy carefully held his little sister by the hand, leading her like a princess. "Mummy!" the little ones shouted in unison, hugging her. "My good ones," Karen smiled, hugging the little ones. "Good morning, Mrs. Musser." "Good morning. I see you're in a good mood today," the nanny answered her warily. The woman's eyes were relieved. Lately, she had been distressed about Karen. She had been working in their family for 8 years now, and during that time, she had grown accustomed to everyone as if they were her own family. And to see Karen gradually fading away was unbearable. Mrs. Musser willingly moved in with them to help in some way and take on some of the responsibility of a hostess. The next day, Chilton and her mother went on their beauty expedition, as they called their visit to the salon. Karen was quickly tidied up, and Chilton had her charming braids braided. But there was a hitch at the reception. "The payment doesn't go through," the administrator said, smiling guiltily. "Let's do it again. It happens." When the payment failed several more times, Karen became seriously worried. Taking cash out of her purse, the woman paid. Getting into the car, she called the bank and reported the problem. "Mrs. McPhee," the employee answered her politely, "you see, the account to which your card is linked is frozen. I can't give you the details over the phone, so please come to the office." Karen never thought much about how much money was in it, knowing that her husband earned very well. Of course, it's some kind of technical error, the woman convinced herself. Now I'll go to the bank and find out everything. But the bank didn't say anything comforting. On the contrary, the situation was much worse. The account was arrested and blocked. Gary had some debts that Karen had no idea about. Suddenly, fear gripped Karen's throat. She didn't work. Having married a wealthy and promising man, the linguistics student initially did translations, dreaming of a career as an international translator, but her husband was categorical. "I can provide for you so that you want for nothing for the rest of your days." Karen never went to work, and then Chilton was born, and the woman devoted herself entirely to her family. If only Gary knew how everything would turn out. Now we're facing the end of days. Karen laughed bitterly. Of course, there was some cash at home, and she could sell the jewellery. That would be enough for a while. However, to her surprise, the money ran out at supersonic speed. The jewellery had been sold, and the contents of her husband's safe were quickly melting away. There was nothing left to do but to seek advice from Mrs. Musser. "Mrs. Musser," Karen began, quietly entering the kitchen, where the nanny was cooking something, "I need to talk to you. I have no more money." "What are you talking about, Karen?" The woman looked at her uncomprehendingly. "What do you mean you have no money? I always thought Gary earned enough to last your grandchildren a comfortable old age." "That's how it was," Karen sighed. "But apparently he had some debts. Cosmic debts. I went to the bank. All the accounts are blocked. I've been spending cash from the safe for 2 months now, and I've sold almost all the jewellery." "Karen, why didn't you tell me earlier? This is not a small problem," Mrs. Musser exclaimed in disbelief. "It was awkward," Karen justified. "I never really knew how to count money. It was Gary's job. He never involved me in the affairs. It turns out that money has a way of running out, and now I don't know what to do. I'm at a loss." "You need to find a job urgently while there's still time," Mrs. Musser declared resolutely. "You have a good profession. Translators are always needed." "But who will hire me? I graduated from university 10 years ago. I have no experience, nothing." "Never mind. Work on the internet. It seems to me that translations are always in demand. In any case, you won't know until you try." "That's true," Karen sighed. "Do you think they pay well?" "Well, good or bad, but it will be enough to live on. Of course, you'll have to tighten your belt, but it all depends on you. You understand that yourself. I won't leave you in trouble, but it's time to take control." A few months passed, and Karen had to sell her apartment to cover the remainder of the debt. "Mummy?" Andrew asked inquisitively when they entered into the new rented dwelling. "Where is my room?" "Right here. You and Chilton will share this room," Karen said, opening the door to a small bedroom. "We'll put the beds here, and the table and wardrobe will go there." "No," Andrew whined. "I don't want to share with Chilton. She's mean and greedy. I want to go back to my own room." "Sweetheart, we'll be living here now. Look, the courtyard is so green, and you'll have your own tree," Karen said, trying to smile. She was referring to the large bird cherry tree whose branches nearly touched the window of the future children's room. Chilton entered the room, her face showing that she too was not thrilled with the new living arrangement. "Mum, are we poor now? I'm not stupid. Tell me the truth." Karen led Chilton aside, not wanting Andrew to overhear and cause a scene. "Sweetheart," she began, "I don't want to lie to you. You're right, we don't have money anymore. That's how it is, and now we need to learn to live differently. I had to sell the apartment, and a lot of things will change, but the most important thing is that we stay together, right?" Karen looked at her daughter hopefully. Chilton's mind was racing, processing what she had heard and relating it to recent events. Suddenly her eyes lit up. "And what about Mrs. Musser? Does this mean she won't be coming any more? Chilton asked, disappointed. Chilton, Karen hurried to reassure her. Mrs. Musser isn't going anywhere. She's like family to us. We'll just see her a little less often, because she'll have to work elsewhere. But she'll still visit us on weekends with Joy. Really? And who will take care of Leela and Andrew while I'm at school? Well, I'm working from home for now, and later we'll find a kindergarten, Karen replied with sincere belief. And are you ready to transfer to a new school? Mum, I understand everything. I'm not a little girl anymore, Chilton said seriously. Sometimes Karen was amazed at how maturely her daughter reasoned. They could no longer afford their old private school. Thankfully, she managed to enroll her child in a district school, which was considered excellent. But it was still a stressful change for a child accustomed to her classmates and the individualized approach of her teachers. As for Karen, she managed to find some work, but translations from French were not in high demand. Everywhere, specialists in Asian languages were needed, about which the former linguistics student had only a vague idea. Everything she managed to earn evaporated instantly. The little money left after paying off Gary's debts, Karen set aside for the most dire circumstances. There was still the car, but a woman with 3 children didn't want to give up her mobility, although maintaining the premium brand vehicle also cost a pretty penny. Attempts to officially find work as a translator in some international company failed. Seeing the effective, well-dressed applicant, managers were eager to invite her into their offices, but the lack of experience and 3 children in tow immediately turned them against her. After several such interviews, Karen gave up trying and made a living by occasional translations of contemporary French authors. The editor was in no hurry to flood her with orders, so the flow of money into the family did not turn into a raging torrent. 6 months after the move, Karen realized that the money was critically insufficient and sold her expensive car, exchanging it for a simpler model. Then one day Mrs. Musser called. Karen, my acquaintance is looking for an office manager. Why don't you come work for them? The job isn't demanding. They can't pay you a huge salary, but it comes with full benefits, normal weekends. Of course I'll take it, Karen agreed without hesitation. That's how she ended up working at an office. Besides, this job left her enough time to work on translations, which added some money to her budget. Thus, somehow, Karen learned to live without her husband, making ends meet. 4 years passed. Mum, Chilton announced once in the morning, I know you haven't forgotten, but just a reminder, Andrew's birthday is this Sunday, and we haven't even bought him a present yet. Chilton, Karen said as if waking up. Are you serious? This Sunday already? What's today's date? Mum, you're something else, Chilton marvelled. Greetings to distant space travellers. Today on our planet is Thursday, September the 4th. The time is 1837. Oh, darling, I'm all mixed up with the days. Karen seemed exhausted. Over the 4 years she had spent as a widow, much had changed in her life. She still worked at the same company, but now she was a personnel assistant instead of an office manager. Her salary increased, but she still struggled with financial issues. Chilton had grown into a teenager with increasing needs. Andrew was already in the 3rd grade, and Leela would start school next year. Let's finish early tomorrow, Karen continued. We'll go shopping and pick something interesting. Chilton disappeared through the door, leaving Karen alone with her thoughts. September the 4th, she pondered, and in 2 days. It will be 4 years since Gary passed away. I should visit the cemetery. Karen visited her husband's grave once a year. She couldn't bear to go more often. Seeing his smiling face engraved on the black granite plaque was unbearable. She never took the children with her. Only once did Chilton accompany her, but seeing her daughter's tears was even more unbearable than the stone smile of her husband. Taking time off work early, Karen set off on her familiar route. There were no traffic jams yet, so Karen reached the cemetery quickly. Along the way, she stopped at a flower shop and bought 4 pristine white lilies, tied with a black satin ribbon. On a weekday, the cemetery was nearly deserted. Karen walked uncertainly, noting familiar landmarks from her previous visits. The ornate fence of some authority figure's grave, a sad little angel mourning a girl who had left the world at the age of 5. A trash bin topped with a pile of faded funeral wreaths. Spotting a blue spruce, the woman turned onto the path to the right. "Well, here I am," she said in a trembling voice, squatting down in front of the ever-smiling Gary. "I'm sorry I'm alone and haven't come for a long time, my love. I brought flowers. I know you didn't like them, but it's a tradition." With these words, Karen put the lilies in a jar with water, putting aside the dried remains of the ones from the last time. "And our children have grown up. Chilton is a real bride. You wouldn't even recognize her. She looks just like you. Here, take a look." With these words, the woman took out her phone and began to leaf through the photos of the children. "And Andrew is 9 now. Yesterday with Chilton, we went to choose a present for him. Your son is into airplane modelling. We bought him an airplane on batteries. Chilton says he'll jump to the ceiling when he sees it. And Leela's a year away to school. She's smart. She can read and write. Sometimes I even practice French with her." Karen sighed heavily, wiping away her tears with the palm of her hand. She didn't know what else to say to a dead person. "Well, everything is the same. I'm working at the same place. I don't make a lot of money, of course, but I have enough to live on. Mrs. Musser supports us a lot. She has retired and often takes the younger ones to her. She took them to a dacha all summer, teaching them to garden." For 15 minutes, Karen sat in complete silence, immersed in her memories. The birdsong immersed her in some meditative state. Suddenly, this calmness was broken by a crackling sound. Karen shuddered and looked around. Not far from her stood an old man in indecision, peering at her.
"Sorry to startle you,"
the elderly man addressed Karen in a peaceful tone.
"You see, it's Thursday. There's no one here, and I'm lost again. How lucky I am that I met you. If you don't mind, would you kindly help me find my wife's grave? It's been years, and I keep getting lost in these gravestones. As if she didn't want me to see her like this."
The old man smiled embarrassedly. Yes, of course," agreed Karen, and lifted herself from the ground. "Well, Gary, goodbye. I'll go. I promise not to be discouraged. I'll hug our children for you." Karen went towards the old man with a tiny bouquet of lavender in his hands. Wow, she thought, I wonder where he found these flowers.
"My name is Mark Spitz,"
the elderly man introduced himself.
"and I see you are interested in my flowers."
"I'll be honest, yes. I didn't think you could find lavender in our town this time of year."
"I grow them in my own greenhouse. Leslie, my wife, was very fond of them. I still want to make her happy. Well, let's try to find the tombstone. It's weird and I can't find it. We are looking for a white gravestone, marble, not very high, and next to it a wrought iron bench. Helen Spitz."
Karen looked around, and on her third attempt she found the correct grave. "Mr. Spitz," she called out, "I think I found it. Come here." The elderly man slowly made his way between the crowded rows of graves, trying not to slip on the grassy, rain-slicked paths.
"Hello, my darling Leslie,"
he joyfully began, kneeling right on the ground.
"You didn't want me to come again, and very wrongly so. You know, I'll find you anyway."
Karen examined the photograph on the monument. It showed an older but remarkably beautiful woman. There was something vaguely Eastern in her appearance, and her eyes seemed to laugh, filled with childlike joy. According to the date on the plaque, the woman had died 10 years ago, also on September the 6th, like Gary. What a coincidence, thought Karen. I wonder from what? She was not very old by age, probably ill. Suddenly the old man's voice broke the silence and interrupted her thoughts. His speech sounded in French. The last thing Karen expected to hear now
was French poetry. Not just any poetry, but an excerpt from the famous poem by Rimbaud, which she had dedicated her thesis to. Karen automatically translated the last stanza spoken by Mr. Spitz. The old man froze, slowly turned his head towards her, and looked at the woman in wonder.
"Well, I see you like Rimbaud."
"You see," Karen blushed, sitting down on the bench. "In college I studied French, and this poem by Rimbaud was the topic of my thesis. To say that I was surprised to hear it now, here, and in excellent French is an understatement."
"And after this, how can one not believe that everything in the world happens for a reason? Karen, this verse, Leslie was literally obsessed with it. My wife knew French perfectly. In her youth she was fond of translating classics, and one day she came across Rimbaud. She read the translation, but it seemed to her that it did not convey the essence of the original at all. And Leslie was a very persistent and determined girl. Then she decided to create her own version of the translation. I have an old notebook at home where my spouse wrote down her versions, but she could not bring them to perfection, as she thought."
"I would be genuinely interested in taking a look," Karen said genuinely.
"Oh, please, if you are interested, then I invite you to visit. I live alone. My son married and moved abroad long ago, visits once every couple of years. And I am afraid to fly. I haven't even seen my grandchildren in person. Since Leslie passed away, I live as a recluse. If it's not too much trouble, come over. I live near the Central Library."
Karen nodded. Someone might find the old man's offer dubious, but the woman felt that this person was very lonely, and the sincerity with which he shared the details of his life was endearing. Moreover, Karen genuinely wanted to see the translations of Rimbaud. "I will definitely come. Let's say tomorrow at 5. Will that be convenient?"
Of course," the elderly man assured her. "Come over and I'll treat you to my signature coffee, according to an Algerian recipe."
The new acquaintances spent some time at the cemetery, after which Karen kindly offered to drive Mr. Spitz home. All the way, he told her about the peculiarities of growing flowers in a home greenhouse. Karen could not have imagined that it could be so interesting. The next evening, after finishing work, Karen called her eldest daughter and arranged for her to pick up Leela from kindergarten, warning that she might be a bit late. "Mum," Chilton said over the phone, "you'll be late? Is it because of work, or are you going on a date?"
"Oh, sweetie, it's not a date,"
Karen laughed. "I have a meeting scheduled. I'll try not to be too long, okay?" "Got it, Mum," Chilton chirped. "Don't worry." On her way, Karen bought some pastries, as it felt awkward to visit someone empty-handed. Then she parked near an impressive entrance adorned with stucco, noting that the building where the old man lived was quite grand, even by modern standards. In the past, such buildings were home to the diplomats, academics and high-ranking officials. Today, only the very wealthy could afford an apartment in such an architectural gem. Mr. Spitz lived on the 7th and top floor, ascending in an antique elevator with a sliding iron grate. Karen admired the rich decor of the staircase landing. Ornate stucco adorned the walls, marble floors gleamed with cleanliness, and each door boasted a golden plaque with the resident's initials. Mr. Spitz greeted her with a broad smile. The old man was dressed in an impeccably fitting grey wool suit that made him look significantly younger.
"Good evening, dear Karen," he greeted her. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to come."
"Why not?" Karen asked, somewhat embarrassed.
"Well, you must agree, meeting at a cemetery is a rather dubious way to start a friendship."
The old man smiled.
"Although, considering how life flows these days, it's wonderful that strangers can even talk to each other and find a common topic."
"I confess," Karen replied, "I'm driven by professional interest, and I'm also very curious to try the coffee you raved about. I even brought some pastries."
"Thank you." Mr. Spitz took the proffered package of treats. "Please come in."
Karen entered a vast living room. The apartment had high ceilings, at least 4 meters tall. One wall of the spacious room was entirely lined with bookshelves, filled with rare editions that the library's owner had collected over decades. There were even some ancient, medieval-looking manuscripts and volumes with gold letters, worn by time, on their spines.
"I see you like my little collection,"
Mr. Spitz remarked, bringing in a tray with a coffee pot and sweets. "Little? There must be at least 2,000 volumes here," Karen responded, continuing to examine the books.
3,047, to be exact, the old man informed her. "There used to be more, but after Leslie's death I donated part of the collection to the university library, as she had wished. And now, even though I'm retired, I can't read as much as I used to. My eyesight isn't what it was. And, you know, it was more interesting to discuss what we'd read with Leslie. Sometimes I open her favourite illustrated editions and simply admire the pictures. Like this one."
Mr. Spitz reached for one of the shelves holding a collection of beautifully bound books with golden Arabic ornaments.
"The Arabian Nights,"
he presented, showing Karen an exquisitely beautiful book, silk-bound, with a glossy enamel inlay depicting Scheherazade in a blooming garden.
"This edition is from 1913 in French with illustrations."
"My goodness, it's gorgeous!" Karen exclaimed in admiration. "I would never have thought that such specimens are kept in private collections. This is a true work of art."
"You're right," the old man smiled. "Such collections can easily be sold at auctions for a decent amount of money. Today there are no more than 5 complete collections of exactly these books, but I would not sell them for any money. You see, they are not just well-preserved volumes. This is memory, moments of happiness, gone forever, but also forever remaining in my soul. Leslie and I brought this collection in Paris, believe it or not, for 300 francs, although at that time this sum seemed fabulous to us. We had only 300 francs left. Seeing how my wife's eyes were burning, the seller could not resist and gave in. Probably he regretted it 1,000,000 times later. After all, today the cost of such a collection is at least 30,000 euros.
"No way," Karen marvelled. "Really?"
"True story," the old man sighed. "But what's the use of money if you can't buy anything with it? Think about it. Where would an old man like me need such a sum? But why? For the funeral, perhaps, but I'm not some pharaoh."
Karen laughed. Mr. Spitz was right. She wondered what she would do if she owned such valuable books. Probably she would sell them without a second thought. She needed the money to raise her children. Every penny counted. But if the books belonged to her children, then no, not for any money. "Mr. Spitz," she began, sipping coffee from an elegant porcelain cup. "This coffee is amazing. I've never tasted anything like it."
"Ah," the elderly man laughed. "I'm glad you appreciated my signature recipe, although calling it mine is not entirely correct. I learned to make coffee this way from an old Arab named Amin. His coffee shop was located in one of the old quarters. Arabs greatly value coffee. For them it's not just a drink, but a whole culture."
"How interesting," Karen exclaimed. "And have you travelled a lot?"
"A lot," the old man sighed. "Well, Algeria is a special topic for me. You see, Leslie worked as a translator in the embassy. That's where Leslie and I met. I was an archaeologist, and once we set off to Africa. At first, of course, everything seemed wild, especially the unbearable heat and the lack of familiar comforts. We went to the mountains. It was very difficult to get there. We had to carry all our luggage, provisions, and equipment ourselves. After taking several hundred photographs, filling dozens of journals, and carefully packing their equipment, We were ready to set off on their return journey the next morning. The last night we built fires, prepared dinner, and sat down to tell stories from life which quickly became boring. Then our translator started pestering Saeed to tell them something about this place, something he had personally encountered. The guide refused for a long time, but after persistent persuasion his tongue loosened. I had just started leading scholars to the ruins. The man began in French. My first group consisted of 4 young Frenchmen. Among them was a photographer. One evening, one of the guys noticed that Eugene was missing. We split into pairs and continued the search. I went into the mountains with Françoise, and the other 2 guys headed to explore the ruins. When dawn broke, Françoise and I returned to the camp and saw Luc, one of the guys who had gone to the ruins, was running towards us. He ran after him towards the amphitheatre. There, on the steps, sat Eugene. His head was as white as chalk, although just yesterday he had been a dark-haired brunette. He was clutching his camera tightly and muttering only one word. "No!" It seemed as if the guy couldn't see or hear anything around him. His pupils were dilated and his lips were cracked. 2 days later, he seemed to have come to his senses, but he remembered nothing. As soon as the guys left, I heard nothing more about them. After Saeed finished his story, the silence around the campfire was broken by Sam. Among us, he was the only one who believed in the existence of otherworldly forces. "You know, last night I went out of the tent to relieve myself, and right around the amphitheatre I saw some kind of glow. Maybe there really are ghosts there." "Come on, Sam, what ghosts?" I said to him. I didn't believe in it, but for some reason I couldn't sleep peacefully after what I had heard. When all of the guys had gone to their tents, I tossed and turned for a long time, wondering what the Frenchman could have seen in the ruins that made him go crazy instantly. Suddenly my thoughts were interrupted by a crackling sound from the street. I stuck my head out of the tent, but there was no one around. Only the embers of the campfire were slowly dying out. I was about to climb back in when the crackling sounded again. The sound was loud and clear, coming from the direction of the ruins. "No way," I muttered, climbing out of the tent. "Whatever is there, the sound is clearly not from the other world." Armed with a powerful flashlight and a sturdy stick, I headed towards the amphitheatre. There was someone in the centre of the structure. I froze, not understanding how a person could be there. But the figure was wearing something light that covered almost the entire body. I gripped the stick tighter and shone the light on the person sitting below. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I shouted. Suddenly, the figure quickly stood up and turned around. The flashlight illuminated a woman's face covered in blood. I stepped back, paralyzed with fear. The woman silently stared at me. "Who are you?" I stammered. "Do you want help? We have a first aid kit. I'll bring it right now. Just don't go anywhere." I was about to leave when the woman suddenly grabbed my arm and spoke to me in perfect English. "You're not a hallucination? You're real? I had given up hope for help. You see, our caravan was attacked. We were heading to the settlement, but on the way, we fell into a trap. Some people pulled us out of the cars, started pushing us roughly, trying to put us in their truck. I managed to escape, but as you see, it gets dark quickly. I know the city is not far, but I'm completely disoriented. I stumbled upon these ruins and decided to wait out the night, but it's freezing. If it weren't for you, I think I would have frozen to death by morning." Only now did I notice that the stranger was wearing a silk business suit, dirty and torn in places. "Good Lord, let's go to our camp quickly. Can you walk?" I asked, supporting the woman by the arm. "I think I can walk, yes," she replied, "but I think my heel broke." I helped my companion get to the camp, rekindled the fire and sat her on a folding stool. From the tent, I took out 2 blankets and a first aid kit. While treating the wound on the stranger's face, I noticed that she was very young, no more than 25 years old. No one got any more sleep that night. At first everyone listened to the story of the stranger's appearance in the camp, and then the remaining few hours went by on guard duty. In the morning, we loaded our gear onto the mules and set off for the city. In the capital, Leslie saw me off to her flight. But before boarding we exchanged addresses and phone numbers. And a year later, she returned to our homeland. By that time, a real feeling had arisen between us, To please my beloved, I even began to learn French. Leslie was transferred to the consulate. She sometimes had to go to North Africa, but she spent most of her time in the country. After 2 years, we got married. Leslie shared all my interests, inspiring love for her own, so we always had something to talk about. Heated arguments were sparked by discussions of literature. Leslie passionately collected books, and if I preferred history and architecture, she grabbed every volume of poetry she could find. For our honeymoon, we managed to go not just anywhere, but to France. My beloved wife dragged me to flea markets, museums, and cosy cafes. And at night, we would take long walks along the Seine and dream about the future, savouring the present. A year later, we had a son. Leslie was overjoyed. She inherited this apartment in the city centre from her father, where the couple moved immediately. I was swamped with work. I was sent to the distant region, where large-scale excavations of ancient settlements were taking place. For 5 years, I was home for a maximum of 2 months a year. Leslie took on most of the responsibility for raising our son, but even such long absences could not spoil the relationship between us. During those rare days when I was home, I tried to make up for the entire period of my absence. I organised large-scale excursions around the city, took them out into nature and created fantastic costume performances at home. And I still passionately argued with my wife about literary preferences. Finally, my voluntary exile ended and I breathed a sigh of relief. I was already heading an archaeological department at the university. I rarely went out into the field, buried in paperwork. Leslie continued to work at the consulate, where she remained after maternity leave. She didn't even have to worry about her job. There were very few specialists like her. We never quarrelled, and it simply did not occur to us how to quarrel, living soul to soul. Our son studied at college in Canada, then found a job in England, married happily and only occasionally visited us. By this time I found an interesting niche for myself, consulting and organising private archaeological expeditions, the demand for which had sharply increased by the 2000s. My wife, who by that time had celebrated her 50th birthday, left the civil service, engaged in tutoring. She enjoyed teaching students French, and the youth listened with interest to her stories about wonderful travels in French-speaking countries. And then the terrible happened. Leslie had a stroke. She was completely paralysed on the right side of her body. I was away at the time, and I found out about it over the phone and immediately dropped everything to return to my beloved wife as soon as possible. After a long period of rehabilitation, Leslie's mobility never returned. The stroke severely affected her speech. For me, it only mattered that she was alive, but to Leslie, it seemed that such an existence could not be called life. At some point, she became very distant, refusing my help, so I had to hire a caregiver. In rare moments when Leslie's mood improved, I would go into her room and read her Arabian tales for a long time. She cried, and I was confused, understanding that I was completely helpless in this situation. This went on for a long 10 years, and then one morning, on September the 6th, I, as usual, went into my wife's bedroom to wish her a good morning, but, to my horror, found her dead. Leslie had passed away in her sleep. Her face was peaceful and even somewhat happy. The funeral was lavish. To say goodbye to Leslie, all her former colleagues and many friends came. Her death crushed me. I withdrew into myself, ceasing all social contacts. Without Leslie, the part of me that made me enjoy every day had gone. My son urged me to move to him, but such a thing was unacceptable. Soon I became engrossed in gardening, growing my late wife's favourite flowers, lavender, in my indoor greenhouse, and every year I brought fragrant bouquets to her grave.
Having finished his story, the old man sighed heavily. Karen saw that the memories brought him unbearable pain.
It's been 10 years since she's gone, but every time I hope to hear her voice again, he said.
I know what that's like, Karen replied. My story may not be as romantic, but when my husband passed away, my world turned upside down. For 4 years now, I've been trying to cope with the loss, but I still can't get used to the fact that he's no longer here.
Karen, Mr. Spitz addressed her, thank you for listening to an old man's story. You are the first person I have been able to talk to so openly in the last 10 years. And you know, I feel lighter, as if you have taken a burden off me.
Mr. Spitz, Karen suddenly suggested, why don't you come visit us this Sunday? It's my son's birthday. I would very much like for you to meet the children. Karen felt sorry for the lonely old man, locked in this huge apartment, alone with his tormenting memories of his wife. She liked him very much, so she found it appropriate to invite him to the family celebration.
I don't know, Mr. Spitz replied uncertainly. Won't I be a bother?
Of course not. Karen hurried to reassure him. You're such an interesting person. I think both you and my children would enjoy getting to know each other. And you and I have plenty to talk about. Honestly, I can't stand seeing you suffer. Please come.
All right,
the elderly man smiled in response.
I will come.
From that day on, Mr. Spitz became a frequent guest in Karen's apartment. The children immediately liked the elegant and talkative old man, who had stories for every occasion. They spent hours listening to his tales of expeditions and travels to other countries. Often Mr. Spitz would invite them to his place. Chilton was captivated by their library. Together with Leela, they read French fairy tales, looking at antique engravings that depicted the plots. The old man, or rather Grandpa, as they called him, treated the children to sweets and showed them marvellous things brought from abroad by him and Leslie. Karen was happy that such a friend had appeared in their family. They constantly chatted with Mr. Spitz, sitting over coffee, discussing everything that came to mind. As an interlocutor, the old man had no equal. He literally knew everything about everything. Gradually, Karen shed the heavy burden of her past. One day, on a weekend, Mr. Spitz came to visit and immediately took Karen aside.
Karen, he began, we've been talking for a long time now, and I admire how much you love life. I see how hard it is for you to raise these wonderful children alone. Tell me honestly, are you satisfied with your life?
I don't understand you, Mr. Spitz, Karen replied, confused. Of course I am satisfied. I have wonderful children and a roof over my head. And now such a friend has appeared in my life. How can I complain?
A fine response, Karen, the elderly man smiled. But that is not what I meant. Let us be direct. Do you have enough to live on?
Karen opened her mouth, unsure of how to respond. They had never discussed financial matters. Indeed, Mr. Spitz knew that she worked as a manager in a small company. She had never disclosed her salary, but it was easy to guess that money was barely enough to support such a large family. The apartment desperately needed repairs, and the car was practically screaming for urgent attention. But did any of that matter?
Karen, Mr. Spitz continued seriously, you may not say anything, but I am not a fool. I see that you are struggling, and to be honest, it is painful to watch such a talented and versatile person waste away in a dead-end job. Therefore, I want to make you an offer. I have spoken with some old acquaintances. Tell me, would you like to work in your field? A large pharmaceutical company is urgently seeking a translator from French. Believe me, they will welcome you with open arms.
But I have almost forgotten the language, Karen murmured, embarrassed.
Nonsense.
Mr. Spitz hastened to reassure her.
You speak excellently, without any accent. I know what I am talking about. If you agree, come for an interview tomorrow. It is more of a formality, but you need to come and meet them.
Mr. Spitz. Karen could not believe what she was hearing. If you are serious, then of course I agree.
Karen loved her new job. She constantly communicated with interesting people and frequently travelled to France, accompanying her boss.
She had been in her position for 2.5 years. During this time, she managed to improve her life significantly. She was able to transfer her children to a prestigious school. The constant financial problems seemed to disappear on their own. Even her personal life took on a certain improvement. One of her colleagues showed a clear affection for her, which, to Karen's surprise, she found herself reciprocating. Then one night, her phone rang. Through her sleep, she did not immediately grasp the meaning of what she heard. An unfamiliar voice informed her that Mr. Spitz had passed away that day. The elderly man had gone quietly in his sleep. His heart had just stopped. Karen wept. Over the past years, this elderly man had become a true friend to her, even more, a dear one. But his passing did not cause hysteria. She was glad that, finally, this man would meet his beloved somewhere in heaven, which he stubbornly refused to believe in with his mind, but acknowledged with his heart. Karen helped with the funeral arrangements. While cleaning his apartment, she found a letter addressed to her, which Mr. Spitz had apparently written shortly before his death. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and took out a sheet of paper, covered in neat handwriting.
Dear Karen, I did not want to upset you prematurely, but I feel that I do not have much time left. I am glad that towards the end of my days, life has regained its colours. You and your children are a true miracle. I have done everything possible to help you overcome what was hindering you from breathing freely. I want everything to work out for you in the future, so that nothing prevents you from growing and loving life. Therefore, I ask you to accept my modest gift for Chilton, Andrew and Leela, because I know you would refuse it for yourself. With sincerest respect and love, Mark Spitz.
Karen fidgeted with the sheet of paper, not understanding what Mr. Spitz meant. She felt both joy and sorrow at receiving such a message from him after his passing. Soon, Karen forgot about the letter and became engrossed in the whirlwind of everyday life. Imagine her surprise when, 6 months later, a notary called and invited her to attend the reading of Mr. Spitz's will. At the appointed hour, on September the 6th, the woman entered his office, where she was informed that the deceased's last will was to bequeath his apartment to Chilton, Andrew and Leela, and the library contained within it to their mother, Karen. Today was Samantha's big day. She was getting married, but things had gone wrong from the very morning. The best hairdresser in town got stuck in traffic, and the zipper on her wedding dress became stuck and nearly broke. "You're just too nervous," her best friend Claire tried to calm the bride. "Calm down, breathe deeply, everything will be fine." The bride's younger sister, Melinda, looked into the room. "Samantha, you're such a beauty today," she exclaimed. "Melinda, your sister has always been beautiful. Lucky Angelo. His future wife cooks deliciously, does needlework, and manages everything around the house perfectly. It's no wonder Angelo's friends admire her, said the maid of honour. Angelo, the future husband, was a deputy director at a consulting company. Samantha worked there as a legal consultant. She was beautiful, with perfect hair. At work, she always wore her long, light blonde hair in a neat bun. Though Samantha might have seemed arrogant at first glance, she was actually friendly and responsible. Angelo had to work hard to win her attention. She was cautious with men, taking time to trust them. Experiences had taught her this wisdom. Samantha's first love came at 17. Ben was 5 years older and seemed like a prince to her, courting her skillfully and kissing her passionately. Samantha believed she'd never meet anyone better. When she brought Ben home, her mother was sceptical. "He's not right for you, daughter. He doesn't inspire my confidence," her mother warned. "Take your time." But Samantha wouldn't listen. Blindly in love, she believed marriage would change him. "So what if he's a loader? So what if he drinks sometimes? He'll quit when we're married," she thought. One day, Samantha went to his apartment. When she rang the doorbell, a drunken Ben opened. Then a woman emerged from the apartment, announcing she was his wife. "Why did you come here, you young fool?" the woman snapped. Samantha was stunned. She barely remembered getting home. Her world had shattered. Seeing her daughter's state, her mother knew something terrible had happened. She held Samantha close as she burst into tears. "He deceived me. He has a wife. You warned me," Samantha sobbed. "I should have listened to you. I was so naive and foolish." Yet another heartbreak awaited her at 19. While studying at university, Eric, a young teacher, began courting her. They enjoyed walks, movies and exhibitions together. Samantha was fascinated by him, hardly believing such an attractive man would notice her. After 4 months, she introduced him to her mother, who cautioned her again. "Samantha, don't rush. Watch him carefully." Then one day, Eric took Samantha to a cafe. "I'm the happiest man in the world, because the most beautiful girl in the world is sitting near me now," he said. "Samantha, I'm so happy we're together. I love you very much." As he leaned in to kiss her, a pregnant woman approached their table and, with tears, started begging Eric to come home. "Who are you?" Samantha asked in shock. "I'm Eric's fiancé. He's about to become a father. Please leave him alone," the woman pleaded. "I wish you much happiness," Samantha mumbled, rising from the table. She hurried outside and collapsed on a bench, trembling. 5 years passed after that. Samantha was no longer naive and trusting. She had grown into a confident woman who valued herself and protected her heart. When she met Angelo, she was immediately drawn to him. He was athletic, with slightly curly dark blonde hair and grey-blue eyes. He also noticed Samantha right away and began courting her. However, he saw no reciprocity from the girl, which embarrassed him. Usually he didn't spend much time courting women. He'd buy a fancy bouquet, invite his chosen one to a restaurant, and that was it. Women could never resist him. But with Samantha, everything was different. When Angelo gave her flowers, expecting her to be pleased, Samantha explained she couldn't accept them due to her rose allergy. Angelo gave the bouquet to his secretary, who was delighted, but his heart remained captivated by the elusive Samantha. Angelo was experienced and understood well that women sometimes feigned indifference while secretly yearning for romance. Determined not to give up, he bought tickets to a movie premiere, left them on Samantha's desk with a note, "I'll wait for you at the cinema." But disappointment awaited. Samantha never appeared. That evening her mother was celebrating an anniversary. Their apartment was full of guests, Mum's best friends and their husbands, and work colleagues. Samantha greeted everyone, helped with coats and directed them to the dining room. Just as they were about to begin celebrating, the doorbell rang. "Mum, are we expecting anyone else?" asked Samantha. "No, everyone's already here." When Samantha opened the door, she found Angelo staring at her with cold eyes.
"Good evening. I was waiting for you at the cinema."
"Samantha, who is it? Invite your guest to join us," her mother called out.
"It's my mother's birthday party. Please, come in."
The celebration turned out wonderfully. Angelo turned out to be the life and soul of the party, entertaining guests and even dancing with Melinda. Samantha's younger sister took quite a liking to him.
"If you don't want him, pass him my way," she teased her older sister.
"Let's not rush things, sis," Samantha replied. From that day on, she began to see Angelo differently. They started going out together, to cafes, restaurants, exhibitions, and walks in the park.
"How beautiful you are,"
Angelo would say admiringly, words that always warmed Samantha's heart. A year and a half later, Angelo proposed. At 26, Samantha felt ready to start a family, and she accepted. Their wedding was spectacular, with about 40 guests, colleagues, relatives and friends. Samantha chose her friend Claire as maid of honour. "Well, Samantha, you're a married woman now. How does it feel?"
"I'm still getting used to it," Samantha answered.
"You know," Claire mused, "I heard somewhere that love only lasts 3 years. After that, it's just habit." "Why 3 years?" Samantha wondered.
"That's love's expiration date."
Claire laughed. "Don't say that," Samantha protested. "Angelo has been courting me for a year and a half, and our love is real." "I'm sorry, Samantha. I didn't mean anything by it. Of course you'll be happy. Your husband adores you." And so began Samantha's married life. 5 months later, an overjoyed Samantha announced to her husband that they were expecting a child. Angelo embraced and kissed her, grateful for this precious gift. His joy doubled when he learned it would be a boy. The only shadow over their happiness was her difficult pregnancy. Severe morning sickness prevented Samantha from cooking. Her mother and mother-in-law often came by to help prepare meals. Samantha's feet swelled so badly she could barely wear shoes a size larger than normal. Finally, Samantha delivered a healthy baby. When she and little Roger arrived home, a perfect nursery awaited them. Angelo had arranged everything: a crib with a lace canopy by the window, the room filled with toys. However, the baby proved quite restless. Samantha spent most nights rocking and feeding him. During the day, she tended to housework, mopping floors, dusting, cooking dinner. One day, passing a mirror, she caught sight of her reflection. "What do I look like?" Samantha thought, realizing that her husband sees beautiful and well-groomed girls at work, while she has turned into some kind of zombie. Tears came to her eyes, but she immediately remembered that Angelo would soon come from work and began to set the table. Samantha gained a little weight after childbirth, but it made her even more feminine. When her son Roger was a year and a half old, Samantha became pregnant again. The young woman didn't even want to tell Angelo about it, thinking she should just terminate it, but her sister Melinda insisted that her spouse had the right to know everything. In the evening, when little Roger fell asleep, she told her husband everything. "Angelo, I'm expecting a child, but it's not the right time. I mean, Roger is still too young, and if the pregnancy becomes difficult, who will look after him? Let's wait at least 2 years before thinking about a second child." "Samantha, please keep in mind you're 28 years old. Every year it will become more difficult to give birth and care for a child. I'll hire a nanny. I'm totally against abortion." The second pregnancy was much calmer, without the severe morning sickness she had experienced before. Samantha gave birth to a daughter right on her due date, and when the woman saw the newborn, she realized how right Angelo had been. The baby was adorable, impossible not to love. Life became harder with 2 little ones. When one needed to sleep, the other wanted to play. Though Angelo had promised a nanny, he quickly forgot about it once he saw how well Samantha managed on her own. Fortunately, little Molly was calmer than her brother. Despite being terribly tired, Samantha kept the apartment perfectly clean. She cooked delicious dinners and washed and ironed Angelo's clothes, but had no time for herself. One day, having no strength left at all, Samantha told herself, "I will rest for just 10 minutes." And she fell into a deep sleep immediately. She woke to her husband shaking her shoulder. Samantha opened her eyes to find Angelo holding a crying Molly. Looking at the clock, she realised the baby should have been fed long ago. "Did you go to bed without feeding Molly?" Angelo asked. Resentment welled up inside Samantha. "Yes, I passed by the bed, fell on it, and couldn't get up again." It was their first fight. "Anyway, stop yelling at me. You might scare Roger and Molly. Don't you realise that I'm a human being, not a robot? I'm exhausted. I need your support and understanding, but you just criticise me. When was the last time you took the kids out? You could at least take them on your day off, so I could sleep for a couple of hours. Your clothes are always clean and ironed, the apartment's spotless, dinner's always ready. I do all this myself, and my strength is running out." Samantha burst into tears. "You should take better care of yourself," Angelo replied only and handed Molly to his wife. After this conversation, Angelo began walking the children out on weekends, but Samantha, as many women before and after her, didn't use this time to sleep. Instead, she tidied the apartment, cooked dinner, and occasionally just lay on the bed. She had never realised just how pleasant it could be to lie in silence and solitude. However, she at least started going to a fitness club on Sundays. Time went on. The children grew up healthy, and everything seemed fine. But Samantha had a bad feeling. When her mother visited, Samantha shared her concerns. "Don't think about bad things. Negative thoughts attract bad events. Look how wonderful your kids are." "Mum, I understand, but for some reason my stomach feels uneasy. By the way, how's Melinda doing? Is she getting married yet?" "I keep asking her that too. She's living separately now. She met a man who rented an apartment for her. Melinda says she's fallen head over heels in love with him. She might get married soon." "That would be wonderful," Samantha said. She promised to bring him to meet us as soon as they started talking about marriage. The New Year's corporate party was approaching. It was always a grand celebration, but in her daily routine, Samantha had completely forgotten about it, and Angelo hadn't mentioned the event. On the day of the party, her husband called to say he would be late, and then at 10:30 that evening, Samantha received a call from her colleagues asking why she hadn't come to the party. "Girls, I completely forgot. In a year's time, I'll come for sure. Angelo will cover for both of us." "Samantha, but he wasn't at the restaurant. We thought he went to pick you up. Well, take care and may your children grow up healthy and obedient. Bye." Samantha's heart sank. Her intuition had not deceived her. She called her husband, but his phone was unavailable. After putting the children to bed, the woman waited in the kitchen. At 2:30 in the morning, she saw Angelo's car pull up through the window, and a few minutes later, he quietly entered the house. "Where have you been? Don't tell me you were at the corporate party. I know you weren't there. You've been cheating on me for a while now. Just be honest and admit you have someone else." "What are you talking about, Samantha? I was in negotiations. We had a few drinks afterward. What's the problem?" Though Angelo spoke convincingly, he kept his distance, offering neither a hug nor a kiss. Samantha didn't believe him. She went to sleep on the sofa while he took the bedroom. Times were difficult for their family. The children were constantly ill, and to Samantha it seemed endless. Angelo spent long hours at work, coming home late. He claimed he couldn't work from home because the children were too noisy. "I get an instant headache," he complained to his mother-in-law some day. "And what about Samantha? She lives with the children day and night, and you won't help her?" After that conversation, when Samantha's mother left, he told his wife that her mother wasn't welcome in their house anymore. "Maybe the children and I should leave too?" asked Samantha. "Why do you keep wearing me down? I'm trying my best for all of us." "Angelo, but I also work," answered Samantha. "I work around the clock, without pay, and all I get is advice to take better care of myself. It's easy to give advice when the closet is full of clean, pressed clothes, the apartment is spotless and dinner is ready." The next morning, Samantha called a taxi and left with the children to her mother's house. How wonderful, he thought. No shouting or running around. Finally, some peace. And instead of calling Samantha, the man got in his car and drove to where he knew the most valuable woman in the world would be waiting. He missed her. So cheerful, bright and accommodating. An irresistible force drew him to her. She greeted him joyfully. "Honey, how long can you stay with me?" "We have the whole night," he replied, and the woman threw her arms around his neck with delight. Angelo felt like a real man. His mistress's mere presence brought such joy, and that's why he was drawn to her. Their relationship wasn't just about physical pleasure. It made him feel masculine again. With Samantha, things hadn't been the same for a long time. But here, he found affection, understanding, and care. Here, he felt calm and comfortable, unlike at home. This woman tried to please him in everything. They shared a passionate night, falling asleep late at night. Meanwhile, Samantha's mother advised, "You shouldn't leave your husband for so long." "Mum, it's been 3 days, and he hasn't called once. He doesn't care about me or the children. If he loved us, he'd act differently." "Samantha, go home. I'll watch the kids so you and Angelo can spend the weekend together." "All right. Maybe it's a good idea. I'll do as you say." 3 days at her mother's home had transformed Samantha. With just a touch of mascara and lip gloss, she looked radiant again. But Angelo wasn't home. Samantha waited all day, but he never appeared. She cleaned the house and prepared dinner, yet he didn't come home that night. Sunday morning, she called him without a response. She left a note before returning to her mother's. "Angelo, I came by but missed you. Call me. We need to discuss our future. Samantha." Meanwhile, Angelo was with his mistress. He admired her passion and how she never troubled him with problems. A woman should support and adore her man, he thought, embracing her. That evening he returned home. Evidence of Samantha's visit was clear. The apartment was tidy and filled with the aroma of roasted turkey. Finding her note, he called. "Hi, I just got back from a business trip. Are you still at your mum's? I've missed you. I'll come get you now, okay?" "Okay," Samantha agreed. "See, you worried for nothing," her mother said. Angelo noticed Samantha's transformation. "Yes, Angelo, all I needed was some proper rest." They went to bed together that night, but there was no intimacy between them. They talked about Roger and Molly and work until the man fell asleep. He must be tired from the road, Samantha thought sadly and disappointedly. The next day, the woman wanted to discuss her worries, so she called Melinda. "Sis, hi. It's been so long since we've seen each other. Come over, I need to talk to you." "Hi, Samantha. I can't come until Sunday. Work's keeping me busy." "Perfect. Angelo will take the kids out, and we can have a quiet talk." Melinda was nothing like Samantha. She was straightforward and spoke her mind freely. She was almost always cheerful, with a bright smile on her face. Though 3 years younger than Samantha, she loved giving her older sister advice about men, how to attract them, what to say. Samantha found this amusing. Nevertheless, she adored her younger sister. They had been very close in childhood. On Sunday, both women were overjoyed to meet. Samantha noticed Melinda looked more beautiful than ever. "That's what love does to a person," she thought, and said aloud, "Mum told me you met a man." "Yes," Melinda replied, lowering her eyes shyly. "Why so bashful? It's wonderful to love and be loved. Tell me about him." "He's handsome, caring, and generous. He even rented an apartment for me. I'm thrilled with him. I'm so happy for you. When will you marry him? We haven't been dating long, haven't even thought about marriage yet, so I don't want to rush things. It's complicated. What did you want to talk about? Samantha sighed. I think Angelo is cheating on me. He stopped paying attention to me lately. He used to be so passionate in bed, but now he shows no interest. I think he's spending his energy on his mistress. I stayed at Mum's with the kids for 3 days, and Angelo wasn't home during that time. He claimed he was on a business trip. I checked. There was no trip. I'm scared of losing him. We have small children, but I can't stay silent. I'm enabling his cheating. Melinda, what should I do? First, don't panic. Shield your children from your worries. If he does have a mistress, you need to decide, stay or leave. Secondly, be careful. If you reveal that you know everything, you'll force the issue of divorce. Stay level-headed. I've read that unfaithful husbands rarely leave for their mistresses, and if they do, they usually return to their wives. If Angelo hasn't left you yet, he probably won't leave for her. Don't rush into divorce. Take care of yourself. Spend some time away from home, and don't neglect yourself. The sisters talked more before Melinda left. Thank you, dear. I feel better after talking to you. Samantha hugged Melinda as a farewell. That evening, she told her husband she wanted to return to work and they needed to hire a nanny. Angelo objected, but Samantha remained firm. I won't start working until we find a good nanny. Don't worry. Angelo had to agree. The very next day, Samantha interviewed a woman with kindergarten experience. Mrs. Angus was a pleasant, petite woman, about 50 years, with short blonde hair. The children watched her curiously. The boy approached and said, My name is Roger. Pleased to meet you. Molly came over too. The nanny-to-be picked her up, and throughout her visit, the girl wouldn't leave her arms. Mrs. Angus, the children have gotten along with you. Come tomorrow at 8:30. Your workday will end at 6. Don't worry about payment. We'll be fair. When Samantha returned after her first day back at work, she heard children's laughter. Mrs. Angus was telling Roger and Molly a story. The children saw their mother, ran to kiss her, then hurried back to their nanny. So, Samantha got a reliable assistant. She missed her work and happily plunged back into business. Gradually, she lost the excess weight and regained her former shape. Samantha sensed Angelo's attention returning. They became intimate again, and she exhaled with relief. Meanwhile, Angelo began visiting his mistress less frequently, and she was furious. You promised to tell her everything. You've deceived her for almost a year, and now you decide to play the faithful husband? I wanted to tell her, but she's attractive again. She's lost weight. I can't leave her. I love her. And we have kids. You do? What about me? You said you loved me. I'm confused. I love you too, but I can't leave Samantha. When will you come see me again? In 3 days, perhaps? Angelo went outside and sighed heavily. This affair had begun to strain him. He decided it was time to end it. 3 days later, Samantha was at work, reviewing reports. Suddenly, a message appeared on her phone. Your husband is with his mistress now. Come to this address. Without delaying, Samantha called a taxi and left. That day, Angelo intended to end things with his mistress. He spoke firmly so that she'd have no hope of continuing the affair. But when he finished speaking, she asked for one last time together. Though he refused at first, she knew how to ignite his desire. Then the doorbell rang. Angelo opened it and froze in shock. There was Samantha, staring at his bare chest and then at her sister appearing in the hallway. Melinda, so you're the one my husband's been cheating with? Angelo, I hate you, Samantha shouted and fled the apartment. Samantha, wait, I can explain. Angelo called after her, but she wouldn't listen. How did she find out about us? Who gave her your address?" "How should I know?" Melinda replied, avoiding his gaze. "Clearly you told her. Did you think I'd leave her for you? You fool, you've ruined everything." Though Angelo knew Samantha wouldn't let him in, he went home anyway. His bags were already outside the door. He rang the bell repeatedly, but no one answered. "To hell with you," he shouted angrily. "Samantha, please open up for your husband. You should talk before making any fatal mistakes," the nanny pitched in. "Mrs. Angus, mind the children. I don't need your advice." "Excuse me," said the nanny, taking the children to their room. Meanwhile, Angelo chose a hotel over going to Melinda's. He wanted to see no one. After 2.5 months in the hotel, he still ignored Melinda's constant calls. He saw Samantha daily at work and knew that she filed for divorce. The court granted them reconciliation time, though Samantha deemed it unnecessary. Their minds were made up. So, once it expired, they divorced. One evening, lying in bed, Angelo reflected, "I wanted solitude, and now I have it. Why am I unhappy then? Everything seems to be fine, but my conscience apparently won't let me rest. I cheated on Samantha, failed as a father, and abandoned my children." However, these remorseful feelings were fleeting. As for Samantha, she tried to adjust to her new role. But first, she decided to apologize to Mrs. Angus. "Mrs. Angus, I want to apologize for my rudeness that day. I should have controlled my temper. Please forgive me. And thank you for staying with me and the kids during these dark days, and for your huge support." "Oh, Samantha, I understand how difficult this is for you. Don't isolate yourself or dwell alone with your worries. That path leads to depression. Don't blame yourself. You're strong, and you'll get through this." Samantha rested her head on Mrs. Angus's shoulder, crying softly like a child, but already feeling better. Mrs. Angus was right. She would survive this. She had 2 beautiful children, and though she still had feelings for Angelo, his betrayal was slowly erasing them from her heart. "Thank you, Mrs. Angus. You're not just a wonderful nanny. You've become family to me." A few weeks later, Samantha received a call from her worried mother. "Hello, dear. How are you? I'm concerned about Melinda. She's moved back home and something's wrong. Has she mentioned to you anything about her relationship?" "Mum, you should ask her directly. I can't say anything now. I'm sorry." "I'm terrified she'll do something rash. I've never seen her like this. Besides, she's about to move to another town to her school friend. Samantha, please tell me what you know. I'm sick with worry." "Mum, I can't tell you yet. The truth about Melinda will take time to explain." "Samantha, what do you mean? Did she deceive someone?" "Much worse." Then a letter arrived for Samantha, with no return address, but she recognized her sister's handwriting. Though tempted to throw it away, she still read it. "Samantha, I'm so sorry for hurting you. I just wanted to be happy for a while, and I regret it now. Your Melinda." 3 years passed. Samantha worked and the children grew. Angelo visited them occasionally. Over those 3 years, he had other women who adored him and would have gladly married him, but he had no desire to marry any of them. He involuntarily compared each one to Samantha, and they all fell short. One day he arrived at Samantha's with a bouquet of flowers and gifts for the children. When he began speaking about his enduring love, she stopped him. "Angelo, I don't have any feelings for you any more. Everything changed when I discovered your affair with Melinda. You're young and attractive. You'll find love again. Don't bring this up again. I've made up my mind." "But we were so happy together." "Yes, we were. I don't want to continue this conversation. I'm tired, and it's time for the kids to go to bed." Angelo left, devastated, finally accepting that he had lost Samantha forever. As for Samantha, She decided she didn't need men in her life. She had Roger and Molly, her mother and her beloved job. That was enough. I need a real man. I won't settle for less. It's simple for me. He should be faithful, reliable, caring, and respect and love my children. But I doubt I'll ever meet such a man again. Nevertheless, everything is fine as it is. Samantha, to find love, you must first love yourself. Men are drawn to women who make them feel at ease. By the way, how will you celebrate New Year's? At home with my children and Mum. You're welcome to join us. Samantha, let's invite Santa Claus. The children would love it. My neighbour always plays Santa for his relatives' children. He could visit Roger and Molly too. We'll learn holiday poems and songs, decorate the tree, hang garlands. All right, Mrs. Angus, arrange it with your acquaintance. I'll pay whatever is needed. No, Samantha, he doesn't accept payment. He's quite well off. He simply enjoys making children happy. Besides, he's not married. He has 2 nephews he entertains this way. Samantha bought a beautiful Christmas tree. Mrs. Angus helped Roger and Molly decorate it with ornaments and lights, transforming the house into a festive wonderland. Their Santa Claus would arrive at 8:30, after visiting his brother's children. The children were delighted. Bill excelled at playing Santa Claus, with his commanding voice bringing the character to life. Samantha felt transported back to childhood, as if she had stepped into a fairy tale. Roger and Molly recited New Year poems and sang songs for Santa Claus. Well, New Year approaches and I must rest, Santa Claus announced before bidding everyone farewell. On January the 3rd, Samantha's phone rang with a familiar booming voice. Bill, inviting her and the children for a walk. When they met, she saw him properly for the first time. A tall, handsome man with swarthy skin and eyes so brown they appeared almost black. Though 7 years her junior, Bill carried himself with confidence. After their walk, Samantha invited him home. They shared a meal, watched a New Year's movie with the children, and before leaving, Bill said, "Perhaps we could take the children to the sledding hill sometime." "I'll call you," Samantha replied softly. They spent the winter holidays together. The children adored Bill. He was just like a big kid himself, sledding with them, building snowmen, and joining in snowball fights. Melinda gazed pensively out the train window as it carried her away from home. The journey wasn't long, giving her time to reflect. She had fallen in love with Angelo at first sight. After her mother's birthday celebration, she had hoped Angelo would choose her, but he pursued Samantha instead. Their first intimate encounter happened a year ago after he called, wanting to meet at her home. Though at work she made an excuse and rushed to prepare everything meticulously, setting the table, lighting candles, donning a form-fitting dress. She smiled, remembering how Angelo had barely noticed her careful preparations, leading her straight to bed. Their passion had been exquisite and overwhelming. Their meetings became regular after that. Her friend Tara met her with a bouquet of flowers. She was still as cheerful, round-faced with freckles on her cheeks and nose and big blue eyes. "Hello, Melinda," Tara said with a smile, holding out the bouquet. "I came by car to pick you up, and I've already found you an apartment. You'll spend the night at my place, and tomorrow I'll help you move in." And so Melinda's new life began. The studio apartment was on the 2nd floor, simple but cosy. Melinda was a manicurist. Tara helped her get a job in a small beauty salon, and soon, because of her hard working and excellent skills, she began to earn good money. But when Melinda came home, she often cried from loneliness. Though men often tried to court her, Melinda always compared them to Angelo, and they fell short. When Melinda thought about her past and future, she fell into despair. Could it be nothing good ahead of her? Sometimes Melinda went to parties with friends, but returning home only made her sadder. She hated those parties. So many people around, yet no one to talk to. No one needs me in this world, Melinda thought as she fell asleep alone. Sometimes she considered returning to her hometown. Maybe Angelo would miss her and want to resume their relationship. Melinda began having nightmares and waking up. Melinda often cried, realizing that her current loneliness was payback for betraying her sister. One more year passed. Nothing changed in Melinda's personal life. She dated men, yet they all vanished without explanation. "Tara, I feel terrible. Nobody needs me," she used to complain to her friend. "Yesterday I didn't even go to the salon. I didn't want my clients to see my condition." "What's wrong with you, Melinda? I don't recognize you. Where's my cheerful friend? Where's your spirit?" "It's all gone. Loneliness is consuming me. Sometimes I don't even want to live. It's so bad." When Melinda told Tara why she had left her hometown, she couldn't believe what she heard. "Melinda, what you had done was really cruel. How could you do that? I remember how your sister loved you. She studied with you when your parents weren't home." "I'm ashamed of what I did, but I don't regret anything. I loved and was loved. Angelo is such a wonderful man. I was happy with him." "But he was married. You took someone else's husband. I'm sorry to be blunt, Melinda, but if I were Samantha, I'd give you a good beating. You left children without a father." "Tara, please stop. I'm suffering enough. I've already paid for everything." A few weeks later, Tara called Melinda and invited her to their dacha for some relaxation in nature. A friend of her husband's would be there, a single man she wanted to introduce her to. Melinda agreed with pleasure. On the appointed day she arrived at her friend's place. The weather was beautiful, though Melinda felt slightly nervous. A grey Mercedes pulled up, and a man of medium height stepped out. Melinda noticed nothing remarkable about him, except his blonde hair and grey eyes. During the introduction, Melinda remained calm and polite. The man prepared kebabs, while Morris, the new acquaintance, played guitar beautifully. Melinda and Tara sang some of their favourite songs together. When Melinda was leaving, Morris offered Melinda a ride. He clearly liked her, but after dropping her off at her entrance, he simply drove away, without asking to come up for tea. "Just like always. He doesn't want me either," Melinda thought. The next day she asked Tara if Morris had mentioned her, but her friend said he hadn't called or asked about her. "Another disappointment," Melinda sighed. "Wait, maybe this is his strategy," Tara said. "Don't jump to conclusions. He'll probably call." 5 more days passed without a call from Morris. Melinda couldn't understand why this man occupied her thoughts, perhaps because things hadn't ended as she'd hoped. A week later, Morris finally called. The first date was thrilling. Melinda wore a blue cocktail dress, styled her hair up to show her neck, and applied eyeshadow, mascara and lipstick. "This should do," she thought. Black stilettos completed her outfit. Her hands were cold with excitement when the doorbell rang. Morris stood there in a perfectly fitted grey suit, his eyes fixed on Melinda. "You look lovely tonight." Melinda had been dating Morris for 5 months. Their relationship wasn't particularly passionate, more respectful and steady. One day Melinda received a letter from her mother, who preferred writing letters the old-fashioned way, instead of talking on the phone. "Samantha is getting married to Bill, a good man, though 7 years younger than her. She is pregnant. Roger and Molly adore him. Mrs. Angus still works for them, helping the children with their lessons. Angelo married some girl he had made pregnant. He wants to leave her, but her wealthy, well-connected relatives forced him to the registry office. Melinda, I've missed you terribly. Come home for a few days. Tell me how you're doing and about your love life. Kisses and hugs, my darling." After reading the letter, Melinda thought bitterly about how Samantha had always been lucky, 2 children, and such a good man again? Why did some people get everything while others had to fight for their happiness? Nevertheless, she decided to visit home to congratulate Samantha and make peace with her. Deep down, she also wanted to show her sister that she settled well too, so she invited Morris along. When her mother opened the door and saw her youngest daughter, she exclaimed, "Melinda, why didn't you tell me you were coming? I'm so glad to see you." "Mum, I'm happy to meet you too, and meet Morris, my close friend." At this moment, Samantha came out from the kitchen. After a moment of hesitation, Melinda said, "Hello, little sister. Congratulations on your wedding day." "Why have you come?" Samantha asked without welcoming. "I came to see our mum, and to see you, and apologize for my past mistakes. Let's forget the offences." "I can't forget anything," Samantha replied. "I forgave you, but I cannot forget the past." "What happened between you two?" the mother demanded. "Explain, finally." "Nothing special. Melinda just slept with my husband and ruined my family, and now she's asking me to forgive her. Well, Mum, I'm going home. I'll call you later. Bye." The mother was shocked. Melinda stood with heart, head down in silence. The next day, before leaving town, Melinda called her sister one more time, apologized again, and wished her well. "All the best to you too," Samantha replied coldly and hung up. During the drive back, Morris barely spoke to Melinda. Each was lost in their thoughts. Melinda wondering what Morris would do after Samantha's revelation, while the man realized Melinda wasn't as straightforward as he had believed. He saw her differently now, and was glad he hadn't proposed. When they reached her house, he gave her a curt goodbye and drove away. Inside her apartment, Melinda collapsed onto her bed, sobbing. She knew Morris would never call again. Her fresh start in this city had failed. After weighing all pros and cons, the woman decided to return home forever. 4 years had passed. Nothing had changed in Melinda's life, except she had put on a little weight, but it suited her. One day after work, she decided to take a walk in the park. The weather was pleasant, the sun shining, a light breeze blowing. Melinda sat down on a bench and closed her eyes in pleasure. "Good evening," came the quiet voice of an elderly woman. "Hello," Melinda said in surprise, opening her eyes to see a short, thin old woman wearing a handkerchief with ancient patterns. "Do we know each other?" Melinda asked. "No, we don't know each other, but I sense that your soul is envious. You are very proud, and pride is a grave sin. Go to the church for confession, and everything will work out for you." Melinda blinked in surprise, and when she opened her eyes, the strange elderly woman had vanished. Where had she gone so quickly? For someone so elderly, she had disappeared with remarkable speed. Melinda felt uneasy and went home, but the conversation with the elderly woman lingered in her mind. Eventually, she began to think that she really should visit the church, and one Sunday she did it. Melinda found herself deeply moved in the church, and soon she began visiting it every Sunday. After proper preparation, she confessed her sins to the priest. Afterward, her heart felt lighter. Another year passed. Melinda longed to see that elderly woman again, and then one day it unexpectedly happened. She hurried to her, but before she could speak, the woman said, "Don't say anything. I know everything. It's good that you confessed. Now your life will change for the better. Keep your soul from sin." The elderly woman rose from the bench and walked away. Later, Melinda met her future husband in the church, a man of about 45 who stood weeping bitterly. She learned that his wife and son had died in a car accident. Melinda and Paul began supporting each other. 10 months later, they married. With Samantha, she never
managed to fully reconcile, though they would see each other occasionally at family holidays.